Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The regular meeting of the Grosse Ile Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is additions or deletions to the agenda. Does anybody have any things they would wish to add tonight? Hearing nothing, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Motion to approve?
Motion
Second.
from Kyle, support from Kurt. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion, the agenda stands as presented. We have the minutes from the last meeting that we had, which was on June the 3rd. Were there any comments or builds on those minutes? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve as submitted.
So moved.
Motion from Brian, support.
Support.
Support from Kyle.
That was Dan.
All in, sorry?
That was a support from Dan.
Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. A call to question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Minutes are approved. Public comment. It's an opportunity for citizens to speak to the commission about any item not on the agenda. Sir, would you like to speak? No? Okay. Then we will move on past public comment and move to a discussion item, which is a workshop on the elements of the master plan. This is a study session. A little background first. The Grosse Ile Township Master Plan is a planning commission document. It serves two purposes. First, it documents what Grosse Ile is today and the vision for how the community, or what the community can become potentially in the future. Secondly, it is the underlying basis for zoning ordinances. All ordinances that we actually work with must go back to the elements in the master plan in order to be legal. So the master plan document is very important to us. It contains a number of various elements: goals, objectives, and policies, demographics, existing and future land uses, single-family residential, multifamily residential elements, natural features, community facilities, also elements from Commerce Park and Macomb Street. So it's basically soup to nuts for all parts of our community. The master plan was last completed in 2002, approved in September of that year, and it is currently being updated. The Smith Group, their planners, who are hired by the township to assist us to put together this new plan. Kathleen Clark will be speaking for them tonight. The primary focus on the study session tonight is on future land use with major elements of residential, Macomb Street and Commerce Park. The Smith Group will present a number of options where in each of these sections they've put together choices basically for the Planning Commission. And tonight we will evaluate each one of these and provide directional feedback. And I would expect this to be formal. So when we get to an individual section, for example, on multifamily or Macomb Street, okay, we will present motions which document what it is, the direction the Planning Commission is providing back to the Smith Group, so they know and perfectly clear what the Planning Commission intent is. So along the way, there will either be by a consensus or by a vote, we will critique the options that are out there to provide clear directions for the Smith Group so they can complete their work correctly. There are a number of various options that are out there that are quite important. In single-family residential, there's options out there to consolidate or eliminate zoning districts. to allow more than one unit per lot. Under multifamily, there are options for 3-story buildings, reducing the minimum dwelling size, combining the R2 and R3 multifamily districts. It's also on Macomb Street, reducing front yard setbacks, increasing the allowable height to 4 stories on potential buildings in some areas, and so on and so on. There's elements of Commerce Park, and then finally public safety classification as well, public services classification. So there is a whole lot of material that Kathleen is going to present to us tonight, and as you can tell, I mean, that some of this is really very, very important, you know, as we plan ahead for the next 20 years. And so we need to have a really thorough discussion about each of these elements, and then, as I said, provide clear guidance back to the Smith Group accordingly. To make this happen, we've discussed the fact that we're not just going to run through the presentation and then come back. We're going to go through it in blocks, and we will stop when we get to a logical point. We will then have a discussion on those specific elements, make whatever decisions we need to make or want to make, and then move forward to the next section. If we do not get through all the material, that's okay. It's very important that what we do thoroughly. You know, if we don't get to the end, then, you know, our commitment to the Smith Group was that we would have planning commission meetings as necessary to support their work, and we'll just schedule another meeting, and that's just the way we'll do it. So, you know, there will be, you know, if we go that long, there will be certainly a break at around 9 o'clock, and a cutoff time for this meeting at 10. So that's the kind of the plan laid out for this particular session. Does anybody have any questions on that or concerns?
Nope.
Okay. Then on that note, I will stop talking. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Kathleen Duffy here from Smith Group. As John pointed out, this is a discussion session, right? So we are halfway through the master planning process. We've been collecting input. We have had workshops. We have had steering committee meetings. We have read through past plans. We've done lots of listening. And we're kind of at that point where we start putting pen to paper. Nothing that I'm sharing tonight is final. It is all just pure reaction, looking at a variety of different factors, having done this for dozens of communities, you know, thinking about what trends we're seeing, best practices, things you might not have considered before, but through that lens of everything that we've heard thus far, and the blending of both input, our best practices from what we see as professionals, and ways to get around some of these challenges that we're facing in the current environment. So just a reminder that part of this is funded from the Redevelopment Ready Communities program as well, and so we want to make sure we're hitting some of their best practices as well. And so all this comes from our experience of providing an audit and looking at what some of the data says, and we're in the middle of all of that. So there may be solutions that aren't on these slides that we talk about, and you have us go and research and look up other solutions for them. So I think, you know, a lot has happened in the last 22 years, and we can't predict what's going to happen in the next 20, but we can hopefully provide a flexible framework for you moving forward. So today we're going to focus on the land use section, which is the heart of the plan. We will be back to talk about more of the other bits and pieces of the plan. We've got some steering committee meetings next week to kind of sort through some options on the goals and objectives of the plan. But as John mentioned, you know, land use really sets the stage for zoning. It doesn't change your zoning at all. It provides direction on how you could change it in the future. If people come in and want to rezone to something, you have to look at the future land use map. And so we'll start with that. Your current future land use map lists all of these categories. There's also an additional map that breaks the residential areas into character areas, and our suggestion is to blend those two together and provide a bit more specificity rather than just showing it all as single family residential. Here, explain some of the character areas and how they're different. We recommend restructuring how the future land use descriptions are written so that it's easy to understand. This is an example. Literally, I'm editing another land use chapter right now where we've written it in table form, which is what I tend to recommend, or just bullets, if not a table. We look at things beyond just use and writing an intent, which your current plan already has a lot of this in there. It's just kind of packaging it in a way that's a bit more user-friendly. Talking about the context, providing enough guidance so that the intent of each future land use place type has that meat behind it, so that if you are changing zoning down the line or someone's asking for a rezoning, this provides you with enough of the detail on these different components. So generally, does this sound like a plan to simplify and organize land use in a little bit more user-friendly way?
Just a question. I'll just kind of start with questions and on comments on this. Will this be easily readable? In other words, font 12. You know, it won't be
Oh, yeah.
font 4 and
We do it all virtual to be for people with visual impairments. So we do an accessibility check on everything now. Yep.
okay, that's perfect.
The table might be oriented the other way for that reason. This plan happens to be a landscape-oriented plan, so in our portrait plan, it'll probably be the other way.
Is the table itself dependent upon the change that we would make to the new potentially the new future land
Yep.
use residential, or would it be built if we decided
usually-
we don't want to change something?
Yep.
Does the table
We would
still work?
Yep, absolutely. I think we can still take your language and just put it into easy to grasp little bullets
Okay,
rather
so-
than narrative would
So
be our
it-
suggestion.
It really then is a function of how the material is presented strictly.
Yep.
Does this look like something we can work with, guys? Okay, all right, very good.
So in looking at, this is that residential character map that is helpful to provide more context to those residential areas. And as we were examining these residential character types against your zoning districts, there may be benefit to combining what is listed here as traditional island residential and interior residential. There's not a material difference other than that one happens to be on the water. When you look at how they're written and how the intent of those land use categories and what they're trying to get across, those two are really read very similar. They just happen to be located in slightly different areas, and it wouldn't really change anything in your zoning. It would just tighten things up and make it a little less complicated. And so, yeah, you can see here, this is a working chart of, this is how I always have to get my head into things to understand where things are. And so I sit with all my screens and have the zoning map and the future land use map and an aerial and your zoning ordinance open and trying to figure out where all these things intersect. So it's helpful to see that, you know, R1B, for instance, it tags into several of these different types of residential character, whereas obviously R1F is just Hickory Island, is predominantly the only place where that applies, right? So it helps us see, are there any gaps? Where are things generally located? How are things different? How are things similar? I also it's my little cheat sheet for remembering what the lot sizes are and understanding the big differences between things. So I don't know if there are any comments on this. This is just.
Yeah, let's discuss this a bit. Where did these specific terms come from? I was looking at our past master plan, and we always reference single family, multifamily, commercial, and then on down the list. and every one of the items had a separate color.
Those colors, these are these
What?
from your,
okay,
from this neighborhood character in your master plan is what these are. There, this map has these different types of residential, and so I was breaking those apart and understanding how on the left, where they then relate to the different zoning districts on the right.
All right, so you're talking about map 5 in the former
Yes.
master plan, not the future land use per se.
Right. They kind of go to, I'm suggesting that they could go together and be more useful if they're all shown on one map.
How does it make it? How does it make it more useful?
Because you don't have to look in two places. So right now, it's confusing to have residential land uses further subdivided on another map when you could just as easily combine them all onto this map and be clearer about what the direction is. Right now, this looks like you can do the same thing in all of the yellow areas, which isn't true. I would argue that the detail that's provided in your neighborhood section right now is pretty specific for each of these waterfront and canal residential, and it lists specific differences between how residential is both situated on the island, whether it's next to water or not, and lot sizes and things like that. So it just provides an extra level of specificity that if you blend it into this will just better help you guide future zoning.
I'm sorry, guy.
Go ahead.
So I guess my question is, when we look at how we zone waterfront and Hickory, we'll use those two, okay, and then what we're calling traditional interior residential. You're proposing that all three of those are combined in one color, right?
Potentially, but it's up to us what we think works best. I'd say you said waterfront, so blue, yellow, and purple. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, it's just, so,
Potentially, but you might want to keep the waterfront residential its own thing, just because those are much larger lots, right? And so they definitely tie most closely to the R1A district as opposed to the other ones that are more closely tied to R1B. So you could combine them all, but I think keeping them separate makes sense based on how
yeah,
they're
and that's my thought as well. And then also Hickory is its own animal, right? So we have zoning specifically we had set
Yep.
up for Hickory. I can't tell you if that's out of date at this point, or if we did an audit and we go, wow, that's really good zoning that we planned years back.
It seems
Or-
a little like, it seems for a municipality your size, you have a lot of districts. So I will just say that like the minutia of how things are different, it doesn't matter. You can keep them as they are. I proposed, as I was going back and forth with Brian and Ross on things, I was like, do we really need that? Does Hickory Island need to be its own thing?
Well, I mean, that's the question, right?
Right.
So,
Maybe.
you know,
I could be persuaded either way. Yeah.
you know, it's,
Right.
because when I think of the interior, I think of that differently and developed differently than waterfront. And then when I think of Hickory, I see Hickory as something that's different as well, to a degree that I can't tell you what that is, other than historically it's always been different in its makeup and the homes and the sizes and the setbacks and things like that. So are we changing? Are you proposing that? Well, you're not really proposing anything, right? You're just
No,
throwing
I'm
it
just
out.
saying, it's things I noticed that, coming at this fresh and trying to understand what the reasoning might have been in the past, I'm always in favor of simplifying things and making it as clear as possible. So purple, this traditional island residential, is not just Hickory Island, right? It's these other little spots in a couple of places. And so is there a material enough difference other than the waterfront? And yes, it's slightly, is there a big enough difference? Because how the intent is read in the existing future land use right now is the same thing: moderate sized home on smaller lots. And again, smaller in comparison to other lots on Grosse Ile. I would say these are not small lots compared to Michigan as a whole. We see much smaller lots than that, but comparatively, they don't, the intent of the districts don't read materially that different. Like, you could combine them, but it's no problem leaving them as is.
And I guess just through the chair, John, Hickory was a different animal because what was going on is because their lots were so small, they were coming in front of ZBA all the time, right? So what we decided was to create its own separate distinct district. Again, it's different, it's unique, there's no doubt, but it's different and unique. And so it was easier for us to put a zoning that would overlay just that island, and then it cut down in our ZBA visits. So it was really done more for practicality and to help both the residents and those that were doing renovations to their properties, because they were coming to ZBA like it was a rolling hamster wheel. So that's why it was separate and distinct.
Yeah,
Understood.
there's even more to it. The Hickory Island Company has their own design standards,
Yeah, that's true.
okay? Their design standards were different than the design standards of our zoning. So and that was what was triggering so many zoning board of appeals. I sat on zoning board and still do for many, many years, and that was a major problem. It was, the people were coming to us unnecessarily because our zoning did
Right.
not match what was physically there or what the requirements were.
I'm not arguing that. I'm saying, is that different than these other purple areas?
Yes.
We're not- Then is, right? So does that need to be its own future land use even? Like, what is it so materially different? Because right now it's categorized with these other two, forgive me, I can't remember all your island names unless they're marked. Islands, right? These purple areas. Is it material, if your zoning is fine, we're not talking about your zoning, we're talking about your future land use, right? So if it makes sense to still be coupled with these other outlying island residentials, that's fine, we can leave it. It doesn't, whatever, even combining these is not gonna change what happens in zoning. It would just say smaller lots on the island, some of which are on the water, some aren't. They're generally, smaller homes on smaller lots, and that's period. They're not, when we look at them, we don't see huge differences, is what I'm saying. So like, there's no harm in leaving it like this. There would be no harm in creating your own Hickory Island district that's separate from those other two purple places. It can all just be one, too. That's just, so yeah, it's just what is it that in the future, keeping the zoning is fine. Whatever we do with land use doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's just something I noticed that seemed an extra level of detail that doesn't need to necessarily be there in the future land use, so.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Does just taking R1F as an example, which is Hickory Island, does that current standard apply to all the current housing there? I assume not, right? Or it does?
On
Okay.
Hickory Island, yeah.
Oh, it
it's-
does? Okay,
it's-
excellent.
Yep.
And then, well, I will say, generally, I mean, what that looks like to me is like the old ribbon style lots
Yep.
that they used to have on
Yep.
Grozio, where everyone had their little waterfront piece, and then a little bit further back. I like the idea of keeping it, but I understand what you're saying too, and I would include Hickory similar to like Elba Island, Swan Island, and that they're kind of these outlying islands which kind of have a different style to them. I would see a way to combine them possibly. Yeah, I don't know if that helps, but there is kind of both a difference in Hickory and a similarity with Elba and Swan that I think that could possibly be combined.
What are the implications of this relative to zoning districts?
Nothing.
Nothing.
So I think just summarizing it more succinctly in your plan, there's a benefit to that. That's all.
Because none of the colors relate to zoning districts, correct?
All future land use. So future land use future land use dictates what should happen to zoning. So to me, there's not enough, we're like pulling splitting hairs, trying to like say how all these things are really that different when they're materially not. It wouldn't then require, maybe we just move on. Maybe we just leave this all as it is. It's just, again, something I noticed as like, it's probably a little more detail than you need, but it can definitely stay as is and not be problematic. So if people are okay with that, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that at the same time we could talk about things that maybe could be combined.
Right.
I think there's some definite differences between the purples here. I mean, there are differences in the purples just on Hickory Island itself between
Right.
the east side and the west
Right.
side. So a revisit of this, I think, makes sense. I just think it's going to take more thinking about it than we're
Yeah,
going to probably do
that's
here
fair.
at the table today.
Yep. It may be the kind of thing where we take a stab at writing something and then you decide whether it works or not. It's just kind of a helpful exercise too, because something that's required in master plans now is to have a zoning plan. So you need to have a clear connection between future land use and zoning, which you kind of do, but you could do a better job of it. So this is getting us kind of set up for that.
I have one comment between the two maps. So it's like, I understand what you're saying about being simplifying, and if we don't combine, I mean, if the goal is to combine but not reduce like the number of types of land use, it could get it to be a very complicated single map, because we have the 9 or so land uses on the previous future land use map. We also have about 6 from the residential. So it's like if you combine those all like into like one, you have at least 14 different colors. And so if there's somebody that's colorblind and trying to tell the difference between one zone and another, the goal to be simple, but it makes it more complicated.
I have some other suggestions for combining and getting rid of some of these other categories. So let's circle back to that. Because once we also map it and we look at it and say, oh, that's too complicated, we will work to make sure that maybe that's not the case. Just like I had to do this just for my own brain. So I just wanted to show you what your current districts, the minimums are, to try to conceptually think about what type of lot is this actually zoning for, and how different they are and what that actually means in terms of buildable area. So I tried to get them as close as I could to the minimum lot area. So you'll see, the dimensions of R1A are, while 80 is the minimum, I used 100 because it was getting to be a really super long, weird, like 80 by whatever to equal 30,000 square feet was just like an insanely long skinny. So I just roughed it to make it the math easier, 100 by 300, right? So this is also just like where I was like, well, what's the real difference between R1F and R1C? I understand the historic design, I get that now, but that's where I was first looking at this being like, is there really that much of a difference? Not really. And so it is just is a helpful tool to visualize how big R1E is too, and how you have this level of detail of these other districts that currently aren't, they're superseded by the R1E as well. So there is a level of specificity underneath them. So just to visually kind of see that, not really to discuss, but just as an FYI.
Can I ask a question about this, the way you did it? Did you essentially take the minimum width and then applied a length to it to get
Try to
to
get to
the
the square
maximum or the minimum square footage?
Yep, as close as I could. One's off by 50 square feet or something.
Because there's obviously nothing in our ordinances that would require a 300-foot long.
But to get to 30,000 square feet. Yeah. So it's just like a visual tool to kind of, because I think sometimes these numbers also just seem arbitrary and abstract, and it's helpful to kind of see them in the real world. So I think I've got a couple slides here in this that, again, are these things materially different enough to need to be that way in the future? We're getting a little bit too far into zoning, but it's hard to not think about zoning when we're thinking about future land use. And I think one of the takeaways for me was seeing how things were described in your master plan right now. Waterfront is just so prevalent everywhere. It's just a feature. It doesn't really distinguish things, whether you're on a canal or the waterfront. You already have a lot of waterfront standards in your zoning already. So beyond that, is there really much that needs to be its own feature for why things are different? I think, yes, generally the character might be a little bit different, but I don't see how that really translates to zoning. So you could condense things based on that, but you don't have to. It's fine if we leave it as is. I think, we've talked about the limitations of R1E, and we understand why it was created when it was, but it seems like kind of a big stamp on just basically making it really hard to get some things built at all, or having some minor flexibility and just kind of as it, even when you remove that, you still have really big lot size standards. And you have a built out, mostly built out township that's, its ability for any of this stuff to change is always going to be dependent on someone selling their house, and you know, you're not going to get tiny little lots that are going to get built. You're protected enough, in my opinion, from the rest of the zoning. It seems like a potentially not meeting the kind of goals of flexibility and letting people, you know, have some unique ways of dealing with their property. And in general, we are seeing more and more communities get away from only allowing one building, one unit per lot. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. We talked about it and kind of vetted it a bit in the past, and people have said there already are accessory dwelling units on the island that aren't, you know, conforming to your zoning. But we found that, you know, as family types have changed, as people are looking to, you know, help their younger 20-something-year-olds, you know, get their foot on the ground after college, having a place that's separate from the parents but still on the same lot, having that flexibility is something that we are time and time again. I was just in Lansing yesterday where we were talking about zoning reform. So the American Planning Association, this is something that we're talking about everywhere, letting people have some flexibility with that, whether it's an accessory dwelling unit. We've modeled this house on the side could be a duplex or a triplex. It still looks like a large single family home. So I think a lot of this does come down to the utilities that the township has, and we understand why in the past we've been reluctant to have too much density, but we call this gentle density. It's just small tweaks here and there that frankly don't change the character of your neighborhood very much. It might have a few new units built. We don't think that any of this kind of gentle density really will significantly change any, your property values are just too high, frankly, for someone to come in and take advantage of it. So I'm going to say that this is something we're, you know, always thinking about how to let people have some flexibility. So it's something to consider. It's something that's come up before. We've talked about it before. And we've talked about how, you know, our school districts are shrinking, and this is a way to allow younger families, you know, get their foot in the door, get a first home, have people help pay for a mortgage if they have another unit they can rent on their lot, that sort of thing. So I could give a whole presentation on that. I'm not going to. That's my quick summary, and now we can discuss.
Okay, questions on this. Basically, okay, I assume you're going to go to the next slide where you're combining R1A and R1B,
Maybe.
which is what's on that first slide.
It's kind of,
What-
that's a different topic than really what's on.
Ultimately, all of the things that I've seen, you know, in the presentation you gave us before, all of it was geared around more housing and more people. Okay, 3-story buildings for
We aren't talking
multifamily.
We aren't talking about that yet, John.
Single-family residential. I know, I'm just stating, okay, everything is in the same direction. Okay, more people and more housing. My question is there a goal in mind that you're targeting with this? Have you done population change projections?
Have a housing study that's coming.
Why is this, all of it this way?
When you hired us, John, we all sat around a table and everyone was talking about how we don't have the housing we need to support our families that want to live here. So this has been an overarching theme this entire time. We're happy to rewrite your plan exactly as it is, which is completely anti-growth. Everything we're proposing here is slight tweaks to allow some more units come and be affordable for different, you know, price ranges, and letting additional anything that we're proposing, like I said, is incremental and extremely small, but it's from the input we've heard to date. It's from best practices, and it's literally what we talked about at our interview. We didn't talk about housing enough in our interview, and we're asked to talk about it more. So we're putting the finishing touches on our housing analysis that shows gap. Population projections don't work, period. SEMCOG just uses the trajectory and it will continue to show decline, frankly, and family sizes are shrinking. So it's an overarching theme that if you, as a planning commission and the township board and everyone just want to keep rubber stamp your old plan, we can do that. But our charge was to come in and look for some changes and ways to allow some flexibility here and there. And so you could do all of this, you could do none of this. I'm just showing where the possibilities could happen.
Yeah, from the prior discussions that we've had about housing, it was geared around the population projections that you had that showed, or as is, which defined Grosse Ile as being a very old community relative to
Yep.
other communities in the state, basically. Okay, and what came out of that discussion was the focus on housing for the aging population. Okay, I don't recall any discussion specific to other groups.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to interject because I do recall.
Oh, hi, Angela.
Hi.
Hi, didn't see you
Sorry,
come
I'm
in.
late to the party. It seems like I probably came about 15 minutes too late. But I just wanted to interject because I do recall specifically talking about all sorts of age ranges, including young, old, and in between. I recall in many of the strategic planning sessions discussing the fact that we don't have enough options on this island. We don't have enough options on Macomb Street. We asked them to creatively come back and give suggestions, and I looked through this packet, and that's what I saw. I don't know what the conversation has been up to this point. But
Not much
but
about
it seems like
Just got to this.
okay. It just seems to me like some of these suggestions are out of the box and unique to what we typically would have a conversation about here in Grosse Ile, and I welcome that, and I think that's awesome. So I'd love to personally have some conversations on pros and cons, not telling you why we don't think that it's a good idea, but maybe just asking some productive questions and moving forward on that. In that sense. But, personally, and some might not think I've been here long enough to have an opinion on this island. I've been told that recently. But in the last 10 years, I've wondered myself why we are so overly complicated for such a, small and unique community. And so I welcome some of these changes to the lot sizes, giving families some flexibility to do some unique things within their property. I, as someone who has a graduate who is moving on to college, I think that is an awesome idea to have, an ability to potentially add something to my property to provide to him and, and my other children as they grow on to help them get on the right foot. As someone who has a 92-year-old grandmother living on her own right now and she's giving up driving, maybe the same in that sense. I think it'd be pretty awesome if I could offer her the opportunity to live, get a little taste of island living at 92 years old. So those are my thoughts for now.
Mr. Chair, if I could echo.
Please.
I do want to agree that, again, I did hear a lot about different housing choices, and again, not just for seniors. There's issues, again, about young adults, as has been mentioned, but also newer families. So families just starting off, when again, like they don't have the resources in order to buy a house on Grosse Ile because of those higher property values. We also talk about families that shift. If all of a sudden you have a one-parent household, less income, but you want to stay within the community, that could be harder. And I'm just give a little anecdote here that my father-in-law moved in, say about probably around like a year ago, but like it was probably like 2 years trying to find an apartment or a condo or something that fit what was supposed to be, like what he would need as a widower. And then he decided to buy a single family house because he did have the means in order to do that, because there wasn't there wasn't enough supply for anything that actually met what he wanted. Luckily, that worked out great for him. He's right down the street from us. We're happy to have him. But I'm just using that as an anecdote to say that there's a lot of people that would like to live on Grosse Ile, but we might not have all the housing choices in order to allow them to live here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If I could
Please.
join in the fun, I think this is very complicated, and I think we all know that. But I think we need to be careful not to, kind of retreat to making it simple, because I'm not sure it is. I mean, forgive me for, an old joke that it was a Yogi Berra line where he said, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. And the joke is that it's obviously very popular if it's too crowded. But so, I mean, the point is that we have, Grosse Ile is too expensive for people to move here, right? So that's what we keep hearing. Well, they're obviously moving here. There's obviously demand for these properties that are driving it into the place where people can't afford. The issue that we've faced is it the right housing for the population? I recall, I've used this story before. It was Kali Hooperyan when I first came on this commission, when we were doing the first master plan. And we were going through this process of, community input and that sort of thing. And everything was being driven to drive down growth, right, as we all know at that point. And she said, look, you're killing the schools and you're killing the fire department. Those are the two things that she was, raising the concerns about, that, we are driving up the cost of the homes here, which is great, except that the people who have the young children, can't move here, and the firemen who work the jobs that enable them to do that sort of volunteer work, can't live here. So, I think the point is we've been very successful, use that in quotes, at driving up property values here on the island. And what I heard from the discussions that we had up to this point was, are there things that we can do to create alternative housing that keeps the character of the island without, that makes it, enables that sort of, additional housing at a more a lower cost, but still maintains the character of the island, would be the goal that I heard coming out of that. So, I'm not sure that adds a lot of light to the discussion, but to me, as I sit here and think about this, I think it's clear to me that something along these lines, but I think I do get a little concerned if we start blowing out some of the things that were done in the past because they were overly successful. I think we ought to, I like the terms that you're using about incremental and kind of working around the edges, but it seems like some of these things, like going to a 60-foot lot width on a large portion of the island, may be a little too aggressive. But I think part of this is going back to saying, well, how many is this really going to apply to, right? And looking at the practicalities of these things and thinking about what this will do, because this thing could be with us for 10 years or more. Need to think about what things may do. So I apologize for taking that time, but I thought I'd add that.
Yeah.
Throughout this process, we've had a lot of discussion on increasing density, or may not necessarily increasing density, but talking about other housing types where they have more density. And I guess one of the concerns is, and there's been a lot of planning that's been done in the past to limit density. Our island is unique. The only way to access our island besides boat is by the two bridges, and right now, we have problems with those bridges at times. When somebody's waiting an hour to get across the bridge, they might be thinking, "Wow, we need to revisit that density item." And I think that has to be an active concern for any plans to increase the density by very much. And I know from my understanding, the R1E district was created to limit density. And recently in the Planning Commission, we've had a project come through there where somebody had, I'm simplifying a little bit, but had a 200-foot wide lot, and I'm going to divide it in half and sell off the other lot, which ultimately creates another buildable lot. But because of the R1E overlay district, they couldn't do that. Say if many people throughout the island decided to do that, and R1E no longer exist, there could be a lot of new lots spread out through the island. I would think that we'd want our density more by, if we're going to try and do higher density, it'd be more by Macomb Street, not trying to spread it out through the whole island.
Well, and John, if I just can jump in with what Jay said, the success that we've had if you think about the planning over the last 20 years, and, I'm sitting next to Angela, but I'd say, Angela, why'd you move to Grosse Ile, right? Or why does someone move to Grosse Ile? There's some attributes that bring people to our island. One of them is the fact that we've done a good job of overseeing the growth of our community. And again, there is growth. There's always going to be growth. There's a reason why we have 6 real estate agencies on Grosse Ile. There's a reason why we have 60 real estate agents that work on Grosse Ile. Something's going on. Something's going well for them to stay here and work and live here. So I think incrementally, I think that's something that we have to look at. I will tell you, Dan's right. From a density standpoint, if you look at one of the examples in here, it talks about cluster developing. Right now, if you have an overlay district, you might have 16 units in that cluster. If you don't have an overlay, you're going to have 22 units. Is that something that we want? Is that the character of Grosse Ile? And I think, obviously, in this case, the consultant that's in front of us is saying, hey, that's really up to us to decide. Do we want to see that going forward? If you drive down Meridian Road in Potawatomi Drive, there's a road that's put in, some very nice houses that were built. Those are built on 16,000 square foot lots, I believe. Is that the way you want Grosse Ile to look over the next 10 years? And if it is, then we tell the consultant that's what we want to see. But I think, what Jay says is right. The success that we've had over the last 15, 20 years has led people to come to Grosse Ile for a reason. There's a reason why they're coming here. If they're not coming here, then they would not leave here. They would move off Grosse Ile and they would move to Trenton or Wyandotte or Northville or Plymouth. There's reasons why people like Grosse Ile. Is it because of the schools? It might be. Is it because of the waterfront? When I see right here, the slide that's up here that talks about property being waterfront is not reason enough for a different type, it's not a distinguishing feature. I got to believe it is a distinguishing feature.
For future land use.
For future land use, I believe it is, right? I don't think you can discount it that quickly. So I think there's a plan in place when we take a look at our water and how we use our water, our canal properties, and Dan's right. Maybe we look at areas that can then absorb density better, that provide things that we're talking about. But at the same time, the overlay district has been successful over the last 20 years for a reason. So
I'd love to answer your question, Kurt, and add a few comments. So we moved to Grosse Ile from Plymouth, actually. So interesting that you brought that up. And, Plymouth is an interesting example because they have a very centralized downtown area that was really slow going, and then, and blew up, right? And they have a lot of, they have a township that feeds into them. They have a lot of city dollars, very different. They have a school that sits with 3 high schools on a campus. I looked at Grosse Ile, and the first thing I did, I looked at the school, and I noticed that we were able to offer here in Grosse Ile about the same number of activities and sports and things like that my kids could get exposed to in Plymouth. So that was number one. Number 2, people said, hey, well, what about the bridge? Aren't you afraid the bridge is going to shut down? I said, well, no. I'm sure we have that under control here at Township Hall. Maybe not. But that didn't concern me much because I wanted the, kind of the idyllic look. I love the open space. I love the natural parks that we have. But I'll tell you, the first question my kids asked me the week we moved here, we went into a restaurant and sat down and had hot chocolate in the middle of a Saturday, and they looked around, they said, where are all the kids? There's nothing but old people here. That was their response. Sorry to anyone who considers themselves an old person, but that was a genuine kid reaction. And I said, well, it's a little bit of a different community than Plymouth. Not as many families, not as many young kids, but trust me, you guys are going to love it here. You're going to be able to ride your bike. You're going to be able to go on the water. You're going to fish. Had nothing to do with how many other young people are moving here. I didn't even look at the, East River Ring. There were a lot of different interactions that I had with folks here that I enjoyed very much, and it had nothing to do with the land use or the home size. 10 years later, I look and I see, wow, we really are hampering ourselves, and I'm not talking about growth. I'm just talking about opportunity. I'm talking about the people who are investing on this island are folks that have moved here recently and saw opportunity. Young family investing on Macomb Street, they just bought a property that, people weren't looking at for the last several years. I mean, there's a lot of new ways of thinking about things. And I think the word success has been used a little with a little dose of sarcasm, because it's been very successful at doing what it was designed to do. And I also think that high density housing would be something that you would want to look at in a development downtown district. But I think she said that plenty of times. We're not talking about high density anything. We're talking about where are there opportunities. The person who came to us and wanted to expand their lot to add a second lot, John, I'd encourage you to drive by there, because it looks like a gigantic empty vacant lot right now. It looks more out of character not having a home on that lot than leaving it open. So sometimes the rules that have been put in place might not make sense anymore. And I just would encourage everyone to just think about that a little bit differently. We're not gonna burst at the seams in the schools. It's not gonna happen. The bridge, I mean, I think those are valid points. I think our infrastructure are valid points, but I don't think we're looking at, adding thousands of people in population.
You?
So I'm going to throw a couple comments out. I have no doubt about it that our ordinances that we put in 20-some years ago were designed to limit growth specifically. That was our agenda, and our motivation was pure because at the growth rate back then, we would have been built out. I remember a study was done, and they had projected land build out, and they put each specific area in red, and in the next 20 years the whole island was going to be red. So we did what we did to limit growth, and it has worked, okay? But the one thing that we haven't talked about when we look at this is tax revenue. We need more tax revenue. There's no doubt about it. We need more money coming in. And this is a challenge of how we do that with property taxes. What kind of growth do we want? We have limited it for sure. Do we need to open it up? Absolutely. If you ask Angela, she'll tell you what she thinks that should be. You ask me, I'll tell you what I think it should be. I'm a baby boomer. One of the people that had the big family homes wanted to downsize, and there was no opportunity for 2-bedroom, 2,000 square foot homes that we could downsize and not downgrade. There's a lot of opportunity in those types of housing, which you could say multi-family, residential, of townhouses or development that they're talking about putting up at West Shore, where you have those types of developments. Do we encourage that type of development? You ask me, I'd say absolutely, we need to. Is there fringe things? Maybe, I don't know, but we have to be very careful, because what Kurt said is, and I think what John said as well, is that Grow Zeal works, and we do want it to be limited, right? We don't want it to open up. But we don't want a bridge that you can, well, maybe there's people here that want a bridge that they can cross over and not even know they crossed the river, right? It's just mainland and Grow Zeal, no difference whatsoever in the infrastructure to come over. Well, you move to Grow Zeal and you're adding a half hour wherever you go. It's complicated. You have tracks, you have bridges, you have rural living, you have a whole bunch of stuff that makes us unique from any other community around. And we have to be very careful that we don't ruin that in our personal feelings of what our future growth should be in residential. I followed residential in the community, and I haven't seen it lately, but early on in the surveys, you look at the residential component, and that was down low. I mean, it was down low. If you leave here and you go to residents and you say, would you like to have this development, that development, or stay the same? The vast majority of people that you talk to will say, stay the same, right? But we do need to look at growth, for sure, for tax revenue, for shoring up some revenue opportunities that we just miss. But we miss revenue opportunities, not because our zoning issues are bad. I remember the R1E overlay, we passed that where this commission would say, R1E, that's it, you know what, you gotta go to zoning. And that we felt that the zoning would be able to look at the situation individually and say, you know what, in this particular case, we're gonna grant that variance because it makes sense, like that on South Point, okay? But what happens over the years is that that component of looking at it and granting it because it makes sense never happened.
gone away.
It was just no. There's lots on Groseal that that the township owns that would be developed easily for meeting these standards to have homes and homes of the size of potential families, younger families to move in that we just don't take advantage of. So it's very complicated. Jay was right in what he said. I'm in favor of doing some minor tweaking things, and maybe it's specific areas of the island that you look at and how we want to develop, but not just a total blanket of throwing out everything and opening up the floodgates.
And just one other thing, John, obviously tax revenue is important. We also have to take a look at municipal services and the cost, right? So we've talked about this for years and years and years. The Conservancy was one of the first ones that brought it to light, is the fact that we have a volunteer fire department. We do around 985 runs a year. We have 26 men and women right now that volunteer. If you would put just one senior citizen home, let's say what was proposed behind Sacred Heart Church, and have a 100-unit senior citizen home, it would almost be at the verge of us not being able to handle that, right? So we have to take a look at everything. We are a small community. We have a small police department. Our wastewater treatment center, obviously we upgraded it to handle, but that's even close to some capacity. So again, we have to gauge all of it together. We need tax revenue. We need to make sure that some folks have the ability to downsize. You know, like if you lose your wife and you want to downsize, can you do that? Right now, we sell around 4 to 4.5 homes sell every week on Groseal. Every week, 4 to 4.5 homes sell every week. But maybe that's not enough, right? But we have to look at governmental services as well, because if you develop a lot, right now it's not costing the township for the most part anything. As soon as you develop it, then we got to make sure, and we have to have police in here, we have to have the fire department here saying, can we service what we're doing, right? So that we don't put stress on them either. So,
If I could be quick, I just want to say that, again, past performance can't predict the future. So we might have been successful, we might be selling homes right now, but there's changes in demographics. All of Southeast Michigan, all of the Midwest is growing old. So, we have to be able to adapt. But I do agree that, it shouldn't just be, hey, I would like to see this type of stuff. It should be based off metrics. So as Mr. Koblak had said about making sure that we could support stuff, I look at it from a metric standpoint, what can we support with utilities and not changing the complete character of our region with our community? What do we need to support schools and businesses? And then, what specific types of housing and things do we need to attract specific age cohorts, which are going to be who's buying homes in the future? And so being able to go around those three questions and have it from a metric standpoint, I think might help guide the, what we want in the future, not just from 5 years or 10 years, but going 15 or 20 or even more into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Well, let's take that a step further. What you're saying basically is look before you leap. You have data, use the data to make appropriate decisions. I, for one, would like to know, in any of these potential changes, what is the impact, what is the potential impact that would happen? Okay, you have to take it to the worst case scenario, because if you get the worst case scenario and you say that's terrible for Groseal, that means you don't do it, because you have no way of otherwise protecting yourself. So if we're going to make a change on something, what is the housing impact? Okay, what is the population that goes with it? Okay, I know, as I was a couple of days ago sitting out there on Jefferson Avenue at 4:45 in the afternoon when the bridge was open, I couldn't even see the traffic light. Okay? I did not sit there and say to myself, gee, I wish there were 2,000 more people on Grosse Ile. All right? That's not what I thought. Okay? And you know, it's like Kurt said, that is equally important as having the facilities, you know, to support the police and fire. You know, tax revenue is in some measure going to take care of itself because the property values are going up. Okay, now the Headley Amendment limits, you know, the rate at which it changes, but, you know, we've had in my Park Lane Villas condominium complex, homes or condos that, heck, 2 years ago were going for $150,000, now go for $230,000. You know, so in and of itself, you know, it's a very desirable place to live. People want to come in. That's what happens. In the corresponding tax revenue, again, you don't see it immediately, but, you know, in the long term, you know, it's going to be there. So,
Mr. Chair, the buzzword is scenario planning. So what you're talking about.
what I'm talking about?
Yep. So it's like
Oh, thank you.
you come up with different scenarios, and you look at the metrics, and you be able to like pick between the different scenarios and see like which one makes the most sense. And maybe it's a blend of different scenarios together. But that, you know, that is something that, you know, could
Brian,
potentially be
yeah,
looked at.
And that's the problem though, right? Because when we look at the complication of all the colors that we have, right? That's been put together because there's differences, like somebody said, there's one side of Hickory is totally different than the other side of Hickory. So an overlay for all of Hickory doesn't work. So you have different areas of the island that could handle, or we would want different types of development, right? That wouldn't work somewhere else.
I mean, the two sides of Hickory are only different because of the way because of the history. But if you look at the homes, and the lot sizes, I mean,
The point though, Angela,
Yeah.
is that different areas of the island could handle and should maybe potentially be developed different than somewhere else, even though it may be the same land, right? The airport is gonna develop differently than somewhere else. So you have different parts of our island, right? So Kurt mentioned the land by the church. Okay, if you put that development there, would that development have a different impact to the overall community than if you put that same development over, say, at West Shore, right, or somewhere else, right? So that's the problem is that it's so unique that you can't just, in most cases, just say, okay, we're going to blanket all of this stuff and have it apply to everywhere, where there's scenarios that it just doesn't apply. And we don't want it to apply because we'd be forcing development into an area that we don't want.
But I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I think that's what scenario planning would achieve, is taking a look at all of it and saying, okay, well, what would the impact of this change be on the township as a whole versus what would the impact of this change be? So, you know, as an example, you know, allowing for these accessory buildings, there were people to be more flexible and nothing else. Well, what kind of an impact would that be? Okay, maintaining the zoning the way we have it and only looking at adding density to Macomb Street. What would that, so those are the different types of scenarios. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we take this packet and just say, yeah, let's go. I certainly am
Not
not.
the intent
I
either.
certainly am not.
Well, I don't think anyone is suggesting, no one's lobbying for anything specific, right? I mean, we're just talking about all this stuff right
Yeah.
now, right? So I don't think any of us can say right now that that's what we need to do. We're just throwing out all of our ideas right now to come together and collectively put together a plan that moves us forward. So,
And it's interesting, through the assessor's office, they look at it differently as well. They have neighborhoods within this beautiful community that we call Grosse Ile. So waterfront is kind of one neighborhood. Canal property is a different neighborhood. I mean, they view them differently as well. So if you take a look at it, if I own a piece of property on the river, the reason why we have some very specific zoning requirements is so that no one impacts my visibility, my aesthetics, right? Because being that I'm taxed more because of the water, the idea is no one should block my water view, right? The zoning ordinances that we have in place and all the different triangular aesthetic formulas that are put in place that were put in place before is because we had sheds going up throughout this island, usually on the weekend, usually Sunday afternoon when no one was here.
Unpermitted.
Unpermitted, and then all of a sudden there'd be a shed blocking someone's view on a canal. So then we said we have to start doing a better job zoning canal properties, because if they're paying more taxes, they should be able to protect that view, right? And I think when you take a look at the assessor taxes it differently. So next year, they might tax canal front properties differently than interior properties. We also have to sync with the assessor as to how he or she are doing it as well.
Interesting is your canal properties don't have their own zoning district.
They don't have their zone, that's what I'm saying though, but the assessor views them differently.
understand.
Because of the water.
Right,
And
so
that's what we have-
should they have different standards zoning wise along the canal if they are materially different and have different property values? And you have your kind of overall, you have already have waterfront view things that apply to multiple districts in your residential
Correct.
districts. But is that enough to protect what is unique to the canal district? Or as it is, these colors or something else are 1B is what it looks like. And then the outlines are purple, which throws me off. I think most of them are R1B.
Most are probably R1B.
Right.
I would agree.
So is R1B along a canal different than R1B in the neighborhood just adjacent to it? If you have other standards in your zoning already that we're not talking about getting rid of, maybe with waterfront, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying that, like, I know they're different, but if there isn't, if we aren't planning, if they need their own zoning district, let's put it in the plan. But if you think they're managed well right now under R1B, great.
I think that's an important distinction. There's places where we have canal-specific ordinances without having its own zoning district. And so we could do that
That's
with
what I was-
waterfront as well, without having its own zoning district. I hear what folks are saying. We don't want to use a bad phrase, throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to eliminate so much that we eliminate the character of things. But I think it's important that we look at simplifying things. I mean, my perspective is that we have complicated things so much that it makes it difficult for any layperson to look at our zoning ordinances, figure out what's allowed, what's not allowed. So what ends up happening is people just end up doing things on their own without permitting things. So that's one issue that I think comes up. I bring up another perspective too. I've heard a lot of perspective. I think this is a great conversation. I'll just say, first of all, I think the conversation that's happening right here is something that you take any group of people on the island, it'd be very similar, the different perspectives that would come up. But I heard a lot about how, if we allow too many people in, we could hurt things. I would say the opposite. You know, we could, if we exclude too many people, we could also hurt things and tip the balance in the other way. And I'd argue that's something that we've done. It's funny, Mr. Frucci, that you brought up. I forget exactly the person you said that said, we're going to kill our schools and kill the fire department. The things that they said, I think, could very well have come true in some ways. We have many less students in our schools. It's making it difficult for our schools to sustain themselves. I know Mr. Koboyak, you mentioned the fire department and the runs that they have to do, but we have many less volunteer firemen now because of I would argue, because of our zoning ordinances back then. And you look at what was done back then. The way to limit back then was to try to limit to 12,000 people 20 years ago. We never reached 12,000 people. We're still at 10,000 people. I don't see us eliminating some of these things as opening the floodgates. I see it very lucky, honestly, that people would. I think we've tipped the scales where it's harder to get people to want to move here, and the easier we can make it, the more likelihood we'll have to tip the scales in the other direction. I don't know what next steps are. I mean, I'll just say personally, looking at these 3 recommendations, I do think going in the other direction, I do think waterfront is reason enough to be something different. A big reason I think people just come to Grosse Ile or be on Grosse Ile is just to drive around or walk around the waterfront, and that I would keep. I think everyone kind of knows where I'm at on R1E, but accessory dwelling units, I think that's an important one. I think I've heard a lot of folks on the other side of this, but I think that's a good way to allow more housing. I'm not saying let everyone do it, but maybe allow a certain amount in different districts. Let's test it out, see how it works, see if it does things. But that's a good way to add housing without taxing our infrastructure, I believe. So that's probably the idea that I like the most, the accessory dwelling units one. The other ones I don't feel as strongly about. I think there's ways to maybe tweak R1E without eliminating it, to still get at some of what the issue is. Simple thing is to eliminate R1E. That's kind of where I'm at on some of these things.
What do you think is the most limiting factor of R1E? Is it lot size, dimensions, setbacks? Like, if we were to tweak something, or if you want us to look at something in R1E?
I mean, I'll say it's right. I think R1E exposes the lie that we want to keep things as it is. Like keeping things as is all the other districts. R1E is saying we only want to allow these huge lot sizes moving forward. Yeah, that's where I'm at with R1E.
If I could just say something, Kyle, if I could just go back, that the ancillary dwelling, the only issue is, historically, is because water and sewer, right? I mean, that's one of the issues. So what you would want to do is talk with DPS and figure out, if you take that lot, the example that you have right up on the screen, if you put a toilet in there and you put a sink or a wash machine, whatever it might be, so that the in-law or the 25-year-old son that decided to stay home with you, we just want to make sure that that doesn't flex the system too hard, right? Because, again, if you have more of those on one lot, it does create a little bit of a flow issue. That's all. That's why it was slowed down early on.
Well, we have a benefit on Groseal of housing that goes back a long time, and which has accessory dwelling units, and a lot of them just use the existing infrastructure that's there
Understood.
without having to.
Yeah, so that the
Can I
idea
ask-
would be is if you increase it,
Right.
what impact? Again, taking a look at a scenario, kind of a case-by-case scenario, does it increase it or not? That's all.
I for everything I've seen and talking with DPS, looking at different studies on it, not much. It's because you're adding just, instead of having like I think it was a senior center example that someone threw out, that taxes the system, like a 100 unit thing or something. But if you're just adding, one family onto an existing lot, it doesn't tax the system in a big way.
And
It kind of depends on how many there are.
Where we've seen these go in, they're not getting built very fast. I will say that. They're really expensive to build.
We tried to give all our stuff away to our kids when they moved out. They said, we don't want anything.
Right.
You say, hey, do you want us to build a house for you in the back? They'd say, no, thank you.
I'd be
But-
surprised if 5% of your units would ever have ADUs on them if you
to
permitted
me,
them.
that idea is like,
It's the granny flat. It's the it's the great aunt that doesn't have any kids that just wants someone else to look at them. It's very slight. We're not seeing that materially get built anywhere right now. Very much more than just a handful here and there.
Well, there are things that,
Currently, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
you currently are, in a sense, already getting this, like the mother-in-law extension. I've, as an architect, I've designed them on
Right,
the island myself.
Right,
where-
attached to the building. They
Yeah,
aren't
so
always-
ultimately,
They're often attached.
Yeah, you do something by making it attached, but ultimately you have two different families,
Right.
families living in the same property, and that's already occurring.
right.
There's
Well,
actually I'm sorry. Go
ahead.
John. There was actually a long article in the Wall Street Journal on Friday, I believe. Multi-page article about auxiliary or accessory dwelling units. It was interesting. But I want to touch back, if I could. And did you want to talk about it?
No, go ahead.
Your accessory dwelling. One of the things that we've talked about here is data, right? So one of the big things here is eliminate R1E. We've heard that push. I understand the push for it. It makes it's an easy one to reverse. It was the big one that kind of stopped growth or limited growth. It's the big lever that we could pull. But the question that I would have is, what would the impact be? Like, have we done any analysis? If we just
some.
eliminated R1E, how many lots would be impacted? Because in theory, if I have, I could take 2 lots in a neighborhood and tear them down and build 3 houses. If I could use a smaller lot footprint
Or-
and that sort of thing.
This map, so our data's imperfect. The GIS, historically, I will vouch for this. When I was doing your Parks and Rec plan 15 years ago, it was really messy. So area is easier for us to calculate than lot width, because what we got from the assessor, some lot widths are there, some are not. So in area alone, this is the lot width one. This is the square footage one. And so there are limitations to this, which is why I put it at the end and didn't want to cover it unless you brought it up. Because it's imperfect, and you have to have both of these things on top of each other, right? And this doesn't get into the corner requirements you have. Like, to do it would take us forever to do an actual, like, we have to manually go in and measure frontages. And so I would do it, I would eyeball it, I would measure one and then look at I was looking at the neighborhood to try and understand. But purely with the imperfect data that we have, R1A is this kind of cyan color one, and lime green is R1B. And so these could be split, where they're already greater than the minimum, double the minimum. I have more faith, like I said, in this area one than I do in the lot width one. So you'd have to like layer them on top of each other. So it's.
I apologize. Could you say that again? What the cyan and go back to the map.
The R1, which again I wasn't planning on. So the R1A is in blue and R1B is in green, and those are lots that have more than double. They could be split, is my point. They have more than double the minimum lot area.
That's what I thought.
So like,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously some of these big ones, that are the golf courses and things like that, forget about those. But even just the small grained, there are a lot. There are a significant amount that right now are being limited by that. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't, like someone said, modify it and tweak, either the lot width or the lot area. And you could just limit it to, R1B, R1A. They're like endless possibilities of what to do here. But I think the point of today is trying to understand where you think the pinch points are and where there's wiggle room. And again, any sort of like changes that we're proposing we're like slicing and dicing things. We're not never would recommend to throw out everything that you have. I take that back. We do sometimes when the ordinances are really, really bad, and redo it. So all of this is me filtering everything you guys have been saying the whole time and being like, well, you could do this, like I'm seeing this, but it may not be exactly what you're trying to achieve. So if your goal is to allow a few more lot splits, then maybe you could also increase the minimum lot area. So with that being said, I am curious and I do want to talk about explain the cluster stuff, because cluster doesn't necessarily mean more density, it just means preserving the open space in favor of density. So 30,000 square feet, that's the minimum, and that's the minimum for R1E. So I'm just curious, is that a magic number? You could keep R1A and R1B, you could combine them, you could reduce. There is a significant amount of R1B that has 60-foot lot widths. Just me checking and eyeballing, because your data is imperfect. So without us hand measuring everything, there are plenty of non-conforming to let alone to R1E, but to R1B. There are even some things zoned R1B that are smaller than 80 feet. So I always am in favor of suggesting zoning changes to reduce nonconformities. However, this is also a master plan, not a zoning ordinance, so I went too far down in the weeds here because I knew you guys were going to ask. But like, we aren't going to get into lot widths in your master plan. That's just not the place for it. We want to be able to say things like, consider allowing accessory dwelling units, maybe just in one or two of your districts, or maybe in just certain areas. That's the level of recommendations we're going to be giving, because we just frankly can't get into this minutia. But these are things that, again, I'm seeing that are obstacles to allowing flexibility and letting people, it's 30,000 square feet is a huge lot. And I know here it may not be, but everywhere else that I practice, it's big. And so requiring that per lot, as opposed to letting some of that collective green space be part of a shared green space, that's the benefit to allowing things to be smaller lot sizes, is that you then cluster in favor of more shared green space. So,
Well, we had PUD in our ordinance back in the late 80s and early 90s. And quite frankly, it was a disaster because it interfered, it got complicated with wetlands, natural features that were either counted or not counted, how were lots laid out, and ultimately you know, I'm sitting in front of a judge down in Detroit over it. Okay, it was not a fun experience,
Right.
but it ultimately was one of the things that was resolved when the township started buying open space, which relieved the pressure. It was not as easy on an island that had, on an area that had all these wetlands in it, to be able to ascertain exactly what was a buildable lot in order to have a baseline calculation of how many units were going to be allowed before you clustered. Okay, and it was such a terrible experience, the township simply threw it out. We
Have a cluster
but
thing in
when
R1E.
R1E came in, okay, we included cluster in the R1E standard.
And how many of those have been built?
None. But what's
I could tell
but-
based on reading it.
But the point, again, the
Right.
point is, it could be built. Okay, it's in there as an option
Never
right
going to
now.
get built as it's written right now. I can tell you out of practice.
Why?
Because the lot sizes are extreme big,
Green-
large.
But it's a matter of opinion. I mean.
No, it's not. When it comes to cluster, there's math, and then there's ways to do it that aren't just what is the underlying density. You could say, like, in X amount of square feet, you can have this many units, regardless of, you have to preserve 70% of the site, period. And you can only build in this, and you can do the math. Let's look at just this one. This is kind of in a case that Ross caved to us at the last minute, so I apologize. I didn't have a ton of time to think about it. But we could use this as a cluster example as well. That, like, now help me, you did the math. So this is a lot where a house just got torn down.
Yep, it's an 8-acre lot, so we just tore this down on Meridian. Yep, and
Does it have frontage on both?
it looks like it, but
It
it's not. This is this is a Wayne County parcel viewer, so it's not the
Is there like a
boundaries
line?
aren't completely accurate.
A line here.
Right.
I can't. I guess my cursor's not.
But based off of the acres provided in this in that diagram right there, that's the R1B. Under the underlying district would provide 21 houses, but under R1E would provide 11 houses. So just to keep it simple, you would get a similar development like Potawatomi right to the north there. I mean, you'd get 11 houses spread out on those larger lots, but I think that Potawatomi development to the north, I think that is R1B.
16,000 from what I recall.
Yeah, it's 16,000 where R1E is 30,000, like we're saying. But
So you could keep 11 houses, but let them have smaller lot sizes in order to preserve the rest, whether it's wetland, whether it's whatever. Preserving tree stands, there doesn't have to be a reason to cluster it, but also people don't always want enormous yards, and they want to enjoy the green next to them. So there's trade-offs with that like, I'm not saying get rid of R1E and only, like, you could allow 21 houses there, but you also could allow 11 that are just designed in a different way that preserves open space in a
I
different
think
way.
that's exactly what we've done. I think that's exactly what we've done.
It's,
You could have the 11 clustered in one area
Yeah.
on the same.
they're still really big lots.
I think one thing that's important, though, with talking with clusters or any of these, like, for example, you're probably not going to be able, a net lot, realistically, you're not going to be able to put more than, I don't know, 3 homes in there, because they have to have frontage on roads. So you need some developer, somebody has to go through and put a road through that property in order to have more houses. And I've been in the planning commission for a while now, and I haven't seen many developers come into this community to add roads. We have had one project we reviewed, and ultimately it was approved because they went away from trying to fit 20 houses in there, and that property was able to support, I think, like 2 houses. That's it, because it only had enough frontage on a road for
Right.
2 houses. So they're able to do that, and so we approved it. But that's one thing with anything with clustered, you need some developer to make the investment and add roads.
Right.
And the only other thing I would add, and just for education, I guess, historical education, John said we had PUD. We also had like a 10% set aside. Our idea was create a ring, 10% a buffer around, and the developer gives up 1 or 2 buildable lots, buffers it so that it's buffered from one subdivision to another subdivision. The problem is, over time, that homeowner that's got the 10% will knock it down, will sod it, will
They
fill
think
it
it's
in.
theirs, yeah.
It's theirs.
Right.
And And so if you take a look at Potawatomi, just like Ross said, if you go north on this layout, when you drive down Meridian Road, the character of that, those are very nice homes. A lot of people put a lot of time and effort and money into those homes, but it looks a little bit unique. It stands out from what we're used to seeing on Grocio. We've tried over the last 25 years to try to zone spaces differently to try to do exactly what you're saying. And it's sometimes been successful, sometimes it's been terribly not successful. And even right now, John used to live in a subdivision that had the 10% set aside. There's a fight going on between homeowners there as to whether or not whose property that is, right? So we've tried to kind of
The enforcement of it is,
Pardon me?
enforcement becomes a challenge.
Challenge for the township, right? And then easements, and now they're taking it down to Wayne County. It's multiple ways to do it. So you take a look at the one lot that Ross pulled out. The question is, do we want 11 homes there? If the gentleman owns it and it could be zoned for the way he wants to sell it, my thought is he should be able to develop it any way he wants under our zoning. If you're saying we should go down an R1B versus an overlay and have 7 homes there versus 3, I worry about the people that are on both sides of it as well, right? Because now they're going to be impacted. So I think like we've said along this table, we have to take a look at not just now, but over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to do some better planning. So we've tried so many different ways though over the years, try to figure out a way to do a better job. And it sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't work. We try, and the overlay district was a way to actually try to figure out a way to make sure that people want to clear cut properties and use wetlands for their density calculation. And
Well, I think, Kurt, you just said that we've done things over the years, and, I was first on this commission 21, 22 years ago. We think about this stuff all the time, not just a master plan, right? I mean, it's how we develop, what type of development, where, and so on and so forth. So, what we have just wasn't willy-nilly, and it just happened to morph into what we call Groziel now. Can we do a better job? Sure. Do we need to look at it? Absolutely. That's why we're doing.
Right.
So we have you here, right? So I think that anybody that says we shouldn't do anything, we love it, is a wrong attitude. We need to look at good, fair, honest, beneficial development and where that is. The problem with that is it's so uniquely specific in so many areas of how we do it. It's tough just to say, okay, well, this and just that.
Unintended consequences of
Right.
overgeneralizing. Mhm.
And the way that we've handled that, we kind of punted and said, well, we have a ZBA. The ZBA can handle some of these things. And that just hasn't worked. I was one of those, hey, ZBA will be fair, we'll do, but it just doesn't work.
Well, let's be clear. I don't want you to throw ZBA under the bus. The
Oh, that's-
ZBA makes decisions based on the criteria that are in our ordinance and nothing more.
Right,
Whether you
Right.
like the decision or don't like the decision, the criteria are clear.
And-
And the ZBA is obligated under the law to follow that.
Yep.
It's not what you like or what you don't like.
It's a big
Okay?
misconception.
It's what is presented versus what is the standard. It's basically black or white.
Right. Many ZBAs don't function that way. So I'm glad that you do function that way because that is the case law, legal jurisdiction is you're not supposed to be a means around the ordinance. The ZBA is supposed to be.
Well, now I know why John never lets me on the ZBA.
It's a very specific rule. You should be saying no more than you're saying yes on ZBA. But what's nice about a master plan is we can suggest changes into zoning to give you more flexibility at the planning commission level, or at the staff level. We're doing that all the time now, like adding in just some waivers authority. So it doesn't have to go to ZBA because a variance should be very, very rare and based on a certain specific lot size. I don't want you sending stuff to ZBA. So what I would love is if you guys can think of the last 5 years or however long you've been on planning commission, if there are things that are like your pet peeves that like, if only we had the ability to shift this, to have some flexibility in setbacks or in building height or whatever, where it would be really helpful to know where those little tweaks could be because we can slice and dice this 18 million different ways. like you're saying, right? So like what's rising to the top, I guess, is as we're thinking about planning future land use, starting with your old plan as a base, we could also throw the whole thing out and start over. I'm not going to recommend that. Like I said, our data is limited, and so we have to see what we can get from DPS to see what some of those trade-offs might be. We can run some math, but it's going to be imperfect. I guess if any of these ideas have risen to the top, it sounds like there's some thought around some support around ADUs of just trying to understand what that means a little more. We can try and explain that and give you more trade-offs with that. I guess just knowing how R1E has been limiting or how it's been successful, whether you think it's successful in a good way or successful in a sarcastic way, just trying to understand where some of that nuance lies so that we can.
Yeah, so to kind of, we're not going to solve all this tonight, but I think the one thing that we can get a sense of is what is the feeling of R1E, right? Once we have the idea of the commission of what the R1E is going forward, then these ideas will be more realistic in what we want to do, right? Because if we're limited to R1E and we're
Yeah.
Well, that comes back to what Brian was saying about the scenario. Look before you leap. Where's the data to, if we're going to make a change, what's the impact? Okay, and evaluate it against the impact.
That's where the data is imperfect, and so you have to give us some wiggle room there. Is we can't give you a yes or no answer because
Well, you do an estimate.
So
if you tell the commission it's going to add, potentially 150 lots, and the average number of homeowners is 3.2. Okay, that is some sort of a rough figure. Now, whether it's 100 lots or whether it's 110 lots doesn't matter. What matters is it 100 lots or is it 500 lots? Okay, we're looking for gross numbers that will give us some direction, because you can't overanalyze it or you'll never get there.
Right. So, this is a first step in that direction, right? So some of these aren't going to split. Like, we already know they're not going to, because it's public, or it's, these long ones over on the right, I think, are some level preserve. We've got Centennial or
You're already on track. You're making those kind of judgments.
So but to me, it's like, this doesn't look scary to me because I know that 98% of these lots are never going to split, just by how math works in terms of real estate. So I guess it would be helpful to know what comfort level people have with how small, and that's why I was asking about lot size. Is 60 feet too narrow if there already are some 60-foot wide lots in R1B? Because that would change this, right? So even if you kept R1E and changed the lot dimension, right, that's going to have different repercussions. But if we were to, it's going to be hard for us to quantify how many lots are currently non-conforming under R1B because our data is imperfect. So, that's that level, comfort level of what I'm trying to gauge.
Well, I guess
Really, we're not going to make.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think you've made comments about R1B, with a lot of them being undersized. Okay, I know there was a discussion that you had with the assessor, and he gave you a bunch of lot widths. Okay, and
Not all of them.
And I got in on that because the assessor measures the lot width at the street line.
Right.
We measure the lot width 40 feet back, so it's comparing apples to oranges.
Right, which is why
and
it's
I
imperfect.
would say that outside of we have a large number of undeveloped lots that were actually from a development prior to the Depression that never got built, okay? And there's an overlying zoning over that, okay? So, but yet on the maps, they show as 50-foot or 40-foot lots.
Little platted ones up in the north.
Those
right?
are 40 foot wide.
And
So they're platted, but they're
they're-
not, they're zoned, they can't be built. But a lot of it's wetlands anyway, I think, when we.
But,
ran
and the same thing basically applies when you get down to Hickory Island.
Right.
The west part of Hickory Island has 60-foot lots. It's still zoned R1B, if I recall correctly. But, that is really primarily the exception. You look, go around the rest of the island, you're going to find R1B is 90% to 95% in compliance with the width dimension.
That's fine. So, but one of these bigger undeveloped lots were to come in with 60-foot lots, is that a no-go? That's what I'm trying to get at. Not necessarily is every single R1B lot going to split into that, but like,
Well,
where are those thresholds of like absolutely not versus like, okay, that's not too scary. That's what I'm trying to gauge.
I don't understand why we'd make it any different than what the rest of the zoning of the island is, to be consistent.
No, the
Yeah,
zoning of the
that
island
is
is
my
R1E.
Right, so let me ask you, John, or I guess through John, instead of throwing it out, maybe I actually ask it a different way. Right now, you're suggesting, what happens if we get rid of it? No overlay district, no R1Z, R1E. Is there a compromise to that? So maybe back when we put it in place, it was $2,000, in your estimation, it was $2,000. What happens if we calm it down a little bit? It's almost like the Patriots Act after 9/11, right? Big blanket went on everything. Then you
But like-
see how it gets smaller over time. So instead of being 30,000, let's say it's 25,000 or 28,000 or 22,000. What's wrong with that from a planning perspective? Instead of just throwing it out, because what I hear is just get rid of it because it's too great. It's something that we don't see this anywhere. Well, you know what? With all due respect, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I worry about what we're going to do moving forward over the next 10 years. So does it make sense to reduce it? So it's larger than R1B, but it's less than the overlay district that's in place right now. Is that good planning? I think that's probably a good idea to at least
Pitch,
it's
yeah.
to listen to that discussion, right?
Right, so what if instead of 125 feet minimum width, it's 100 feet minimum?
Correct.
Again, I would say, why have R1B and R1, why have all these districts? If you just are blanketly saying everything has to be this new big one.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of building going on the island. It's infill development.
And they're all building under R1E right now?
No,
Right.
they're not. If they're already lots that have been defined and
Oh, like
platted.
tear down and rebuild, yes.
No,
okay.
vacant lots. We have subdivisions out here that aren't completely built out. And they're built on R1D standards primarily, or R1B if a home is being knocked down. There is building going on, and R1E has absolutely nothing to do with it.
So what has been, my understanding was that R1E was limiting because its scale is so large on splitting a couple lots and that have come up in
New
new
lots.
lots in the last.
New lots is different than existing platted lots.
But, so if it were 100, if it were 80, if it were 20,000 instead of 30,000, if it was the R1D standard, what instead of, like if R1E was all R1E, 20,000 square feet and 100 feet wide.
Then why have it? Because those vacant properties are predominantly already R1D.
So I'm saying, like, to me, that's the compromise. I don't know how much more you would trim down R1E. Like, if you were to trim down R1E, to me, that's the next step down.
Well,
But I don't know. Again,
well, I
I don't know what you're trying to achieve, so it's hard for me to.
You know, when we talk about R1E, we talk about it from the standpoint of what were the economics back in 1999, 2000.
Different.
Okay, they're different than they are today.
Right.
What are they going to be in 2035? Don't know. Okay, but is it going to be like 1999? Where all of a sudden now, you know, the economy is such that that everything that would have happened back in 1999 is now without R1E is now going to happen in 2034? We don't know.
How flexible do you want to be versus how stringent? That's another way to look at it.
Well, and I also felt your question wasn't just R1E, it was, well, one was, do we want to combine R1A and R1B together?
Maybe.
And do we want to go even smaller in those with the road frontage all the way down to 60 feet rather than 80 feet? So I'll say, me personally, I don't think going down to 60 feet would hurt things necessarily. But again, reading the panel, and I would say some of the island, I think it's hard. As you're seeing, we're having trouble even getting rid of R1E with this
Right.
huge road frontage. You know,
Right.
For me, like a first direction would be getting down to getting R1E closer to that 80-foot road frontage. Personally, that would be a victory coming out of this.
I'm going to just tell you what my thought is, and it's gonna stay this way. I'm only in favor of taking R1E and putting it down to 100-foot road frontage. All the other R1A, R1B, everything else stays the same. Let's look at reducing R1E to 100. All new lot developments can be at 100-foot frontage. All the existing lots, they are R1A compliant. All new development, subdivisions, anyone wants to put in anything, new lots, 100 foot. That's my feeling on it.
I had a comment. One thing is R1E. If we were to eliminate R1E, we would create more lots throughout the entire island that are exactly the same as we have now. I'm thinking with the master planning process we're going through, maybe we want to create areas, new areas, like closer to Macomb Street, creating more of a downtown and creating different rules for some new areas. I don't think it's going to be very beneficial to throw 1E out and have the exact same lots all over the island, have more of the exact same thing that we already have. Because that's what we'd accomplish.
Yeah, I can't help but think about the example Kurt brought up on Potawatomi, where they are smaller lots, but they're still large homes.
Right.
So it's not like we're creating a bunch of housing for 25-year-olds by doing that, and they're not downsized homes for the elderly.
Right.
I mean,
so where do those places? Let's talk
exactly.
about that. Where
So
should we be looking?
I'm not sure creating bigger lots so that people can still build grand homes on small lots is going to do a lot for what we're trying to do here, which I think is mainly what we would do if we remove the overlay. I think the cost of the land is high, right? So the developer is going to want to develop something expensive to kind of capitalize on the cost of that land. I do think I agree with the point that Dan made about there are areas of the island that are either undeveloped or underdeveloped, where we could look at it and say, this is a spot where, look at the examples of the things that are multifamily housing that are very successful on the island. We have a lot of those on Macomb Street. We have Hawthorne Glen. We have the Island Estates. I mean, all those developments that are done at a kind of high end sort of and everything in between, and some high end, some are not. But they're all done nicely and fit the community because they're either very nice or they're in a spot where it looks very nice from the street. I think if you look across that is the kind of density that we could build in that would be somewhat controlled and would give us the housing for elderly and young and new professionals and those sorts of things. I'm afraid we jump to the easy fix, and I'm not against revisiting the R1E overlay and whether it should apply to the entire island and should it be exactly the way it is. I'm happy to revisit it because Angela's right. I mean, there's a big empty lot on South Point that tells me that something's not working right in the ordinance, but we're not ready to throw it out, so it got denied, right? So then the point is, well, what can we do that makes something like that make more sense, whether it's allowing more flexibility. If you look at our Bigfoot housing, we spent a lot of time putting in, it has to be this size, but if it's between this size and this size, the Planning Commission has the ability to waive it, but not below a certain size or not above a certain size in that case. So, we could look at things like that could give some flexibility to the Planning Commission and or the Zoning Board of Appeals. But, I think the bigger issue is the, kind of multifamily housing or cluster housing. Our view is that what we did accomplished what you're talking about, but you're telling us it doesn't. So
Because if it hasn't happened either, right? So I'm trying to pick it apart why it hasn't.
right, but we also created the ability to put in townhomes on Macomb Street,
Right.
thinking,
So,
that's going to be great.
and all
and
those townhomes. So one
has
suggestion
proposed it.
I would have it sounds like getting more density along Macomb Street seems to be like that's a logical place to do it. So if that's the case, limiting it to only townhomes is we've come to find that it is why they're not getting built, because you have to have a very specific developer that does that. I would suggest that you could be more flexible in the type of housing that could happen, and maybe you could limit it to this middle chunk of the district, to not require it to be townhomes. That you could have a triplex or a duplex. You already have some single family homes there. Like it would contribute, frankly, to the character as it's described in the DDA's plan. In their vision plan, like being a bit more flexible in the housing type along Macomb Street would to that, hopefully give developers more leeway in making the dollars and cents work. Because I will say the biggest impediment right now to housing, getting any housing built, is construction and labor costs, right? Like it's just exponentially high for them to make a return on their investment on purchasing a piece of property, tearing down what's there. So being flexible on the zoning, being like, we want housing, it can have a variety of formats as long as it's set back here and, generally provides, some parking in the rear and has, ability to have some units in there, whether it looks like a single family house or townhouse or even, little mixed use, mixed flat, kind of stacked flats. That is one pretty easy way to make it that happen on Macomb Street. So that was what this slide was about.
And that would allow more mixed use, like commercial on the bottom and residential up top.
I'm just talking housing period in this chunk of it. But yeah, you already allow mixed use as well. But you're very limited in it only allowing townhouses right now.
I agree with with the different type of housing types on Macomb Street. But I was also thinking one other logical, because I believe our discussion is going towards also where are we going to put these higher density areas. So I thought of one other logical area would be where the current Meridian School is.
Yep.
That school is going to be tore down. There's already higher density. The neighbors are already high density housing. So there's no one who's going to disagree or has an argument on there. And that property is zoned residential. It's already zoned residential. It's not zoned high density residential, but that's an area that we can make a change and we can include some cluster or different type of housing there.
Yep.
But if you look at that, right, I mean, if you put housing there, it's new lots, that's R1E, and that's 125-foot large lots, right? So it comes down to any type of these developments, and you even look at the lot split that we just granted over at West Shore. Any kind of development that doesn't currently meet the R1E overlay has got to come and get variances and ordinance changes. So
I
we
think-
look at, go
I
ahead,
think
John.
what he's talking about is multifamily. Okay, not single family. So R1E has nothing to do with multifamily.
But would
Well-
you be opposed on this site to having small lot single family? Like, it could be multifamily, but it also could be small. What was the 2-bedroom? How many square feet did we want to downsize to?
2,000
2,000 square
feet.
foot. Like, is that a bad use for this, for Meridian? I know Meridian has some environmental challenges, but like, do you
I
care
was
whether they're
thinking-
attached or not, or detached?
I was just thinking higher density, similar
Right.
to Hawthorne, which is successful right next door.
Right.
High density, what level of higher density? Just something higher than an R1E.
Right.
Well, it's it's R2, it's multifamily.
Yeah, but you can have higher density that isn't multifamily, which is very desirable right now, and people will buy small.
Absolutely, and that's
So, like,
the thing,
that's
it's
the
like
reason
I
to
don't want to
change
live in a
property.
high density. I want my own standalone
Right.
2,000 square
And you
foot
could
unit,
probably
right?
fit
So,
both on that site, to be frank. Like, but yeah,
and that's the thing that R1E does, right?
it would limit that.
Right.
So let me ask this question. I mean, and this is going to take speculation that you may beg off from trying, but I mean, if we were to say to a developer, okay, take away the environmental issues, and we sat down with a developer across the table, and we talked to 3 or 4 different developers, so it wasn't just this person's preference. And we invited people in, and we said, you tell us what you would build on there that you think you would maximize the dollars, right? This community, this access to bridges, et cetera, access to
Right.
the pluses and the minuses.
You-
What would they want to build single-family 2,000 square foot houses?
Some might.
Or would they want to build Hawthorne Glen style, 4-unit buildings? You know, I mean,
I would love to have that conversation. So if you guys know developers, or we can find some to have that conversation, because I don't know here. My gut is that attached often is more economical for them to build right now. But there is a demand for this. We're putting this, like, whether you call it a cottage style or not, we're putting it in so many places to allow it because people are craving it. So we're trying to at least permit it. Whether it's going to happen remains to be seen because there's not a lot of precedent for that there. But my understanding, speaking with my developer colleagues, is that, you know, even just duplexes are more efficient for them to build than single family. But like often a retired downsized duplex still feels like a ranch. It just happened to have a shared wall. But it still feels like a, you know, I'm just thinking of the ones in my parents' neighborhood are that way, right? So like, that's the thing is like, alternate housing types come in many varieties, and you're really limited right now with R1E over everything. And then even your multifamily isn't flexible enough to let some of this happen. So getting that, like, are there developers that we could talk to down here that would have that conversation with us to help figure out the math, or we can go across the river and find some? Because most of mine
I mean,
are
historically, when I was employed here, we had developers who would try to come in and have those conversations, but it was, you know, largely unavailable time to them, or,
Right.
you know, or we would entertain the conversations and there was never any notion that we were going to move forward. But
Sometimes
it's not
they're
like
more
developers
comfortable.
don't want to come
Right.
here.
Talking to a third party too sometimes we can find out what
Can you pull up the map that showed the lot that Ross had depicted to you? Because I'll give you another example of what goes on. So if you take a look at, if you go north of the red bolded property and you think about the Potawatomi Road, it goes all the way through to Thoroughfare. The infrastructure cost for them to put the road in was $1.8 million or 2.2, right? So that's without any houses at all, right? They have to upfront $2.5 million, right? To put a duplex on these lots, they can't get that return out of a duplex. They rather put a 16,000 square foot house because those houses go for $550, $600, right? That's where their profit margin is. Right now, if you look at downriver's cost for building per square is like $220 a square foot. Go to Ann Arbor, it goes up to $385, $4. You go to Harbor Springs right now, it's $480 to $600 per square foot, right? So if you build a duplex that's 2,000 square feet at $200 a foot, you can think about where your cost is, but then that infrastructure cost. So if you go to Meridian Road and you have to put in a road or a cul-de-sac or 2 or 3 cul-de-sacs, developers have to look at it there from their margin as well. That duplexes sound like a great idea. What was proposed near Sacred Heart Church was 25 duplexes, one road right down the middle and duplex around it. But it was also that they were also getting some other property. So they were kind of throwing it in for transitional living for seniors. But if you take this lot that Ross depicted, to put a cul-de-sac in there, are they going to build duplexes?
Not up here, no.
No, they're not going to, because it's cost prohibitive for them. So again, I think you're right. We have to find properties that it is possible. The PUD in our brain back in the years was that's an option. Take Meridian Road or Meridian School, make it a PUD. Let's be as creative as possible. Take some of the square footage and keep that wild and let it grow wild, and you can cluster some homes together. So maybe your infrastructure costs aren't that great.
Let them make the choice. Yeah.
Make that choice, right? We tried.
I mean, do we want to add a PUD option back into
Well,
zoning?
it just didn't work. John, we tried over and over and over again. It seemed like we were just hitting our head against the wall, and the developers would hit their head against the wall, and then they would hit us against the wall. So to me, I think that's what Dan's trying to say is how creative can we be with a piece of property to have increase that density, but also make it good for the people that are living around it as well.
Well, I think that when we look at the development of whether it's cluster or individual homes, it's different scenarios. And again, I just keep coming back to this R1E. To me, we just have to bring down the size of that lot. I mean, we just have to. And I don't want to get rid of it. For sure, we don't want to get rid of it. But we know what it does. We know for a fact what R1E does in its current form. It limits growth. It limits investment opportunity. We know that for a fact. So I think that we need to tweak that. And then what Dan said, and he's exactly right, we look at multifamily use opportunities that are not easy to build. Now we need to look at that too. Because in my mind, that's the two opportunities for good, solid development of downsizing but not downgrading. And that is building these beautiful neighborhoods with these, with the smaller lot size, where that opportunity exists, and also building the multifamily cluster type facilities where that should go. And there's places we know where we anyone on this commission can look at this map and go, yeah, a condominium facility would go great there. It would not go good there, right? We know we
How
should.
do I get that information from you, where you want them?
Well,
Just talk to John tomorrow.
yeah,
I've talked
just
to John
just give it.
Bernie. I
Just,
know some of his ideas, but the rest of you would be helpful.
just give me a call tomorrow. We'll straighten the whole thing out.
Just draw me
I'm
a new
sure the
future
whole
land use
commission will rubber stamp. Kevin, the new board, you guys got it? I mean,
So I think using that theoretical, looking at some of these, we don't know what's going to happen with the church or with the country club or golf. I mean, there's things that limit what can happen on these pieces that are publicly owned. But in R1D, for example, if any of these bigger chunks that are, they're planned recreation right now, but if the golf course stops being, I don't think this is going to happen, but in theory, if there was R1E, they'd have to be, the 125, 30,000 square foot. Okay, so, but if we got rid of that, that's zoned R1D. Is that still the right size for everywhere is kind of like indicated here? Or are there other, it sounds like you want a more flexible option that could, have some mixture of housing typologies. But where could those go beyond? Because we've heard Macomb Street, we've heard Meridian Elementary. Any other places? Is 100 minimum lot size still good for these areas that are R1D? There's not a ton zoned R1D right now. And I was manually trying to highlight where it is.
So I'm going to double click on the lot size, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the plan of McMansion, a brand new McMansion on a postage stamp lot.
Sure.
However, when we look at Potawatomi as an example, those homes, they do go for about $500,000 or $600,000 now, but they're newer and they're on a smaller, more manageable lot. So if you go down that in that subdivision, there are young families all throughout there, and I think that's also a consideration. So we don't need to always assume that young families with children
Right.
are going to want or only be able to afford a $180,000 house or something. Like, there's a lot of considerations. Personally, we just moved off of an acre lot because we have busy lives. It's too much for us to manage. We needed to downsize. We certainly didn't downsize our mortgage payment, but we have a lot less to manage in terms of the home is newer and updated, and the lot size is smaller. So maybe that's another consideration for looking at R1E versus R1D and how we manage that. Maybe the homes don't always necessarily need to be smaller or one level. Maybe the lot size being smaller is something to consider as well, because it's less to maintain and manage.
well, that's the only thing that we have, right, is the lot size. How much money they put into their house, it's up to them.
What do you mean?
All we can do is manage the size. I mean, if they want to build a lot or have a lot and put a $150,000 house on it, I mean, that's up to them. We can't tell them how much to put into their house.
I don't entirely know I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we were using Potawatomi as somewhat of an example of when we're reducing the lot sizes, there's still, large homes. And what I'm suggesting is we don't necessarily need to focus on building smaller homes. Those homes still appeal to young families or folks who are looking to downsize. It's sometimes the lot size, if we're looking at a 30,000 square foot lot, that's a lot to care for, regardless of the home size on it.
Are the lots on Potawatomi, are they smaller than than R1E? Because I know they're good sized lots. They're
Yeah.
not small by any means.
Yeah, no, certainly not, yeah.
I
Anybody
will,
know what those are?
So if
I will
they're
measure them
smaller,
slightly.
how? So are they zoned different? Zoned different?
It's R1B lots. It's just, I think it's just the underlying, it's zoned R1B. So
Yeah.
I think that I don't think that was it newly created lots. I'm not entirely sure, but I know that the average lot size in there is about 60,000.
Yeah, they were newly created.
for R1E,
For the R1E,
would have had to have been.
90s.
Take a break. Okay, guys, we're 5 minutes past our break time. Let's stop for the moment. Take 10 minutes and then we'll come back at it. be now. I think we have Mr. Heil in the audience who has questions and comments. We'd like him to come on up, please, and let's open up the discussion and see what he has to say for us. Come on up, sir. Introduce yourself and your address, please, and share your thoughts.
I'm Bill Heil. I live at 29228 East River. That's basically it. I don't know that I have questions at this point, but I do have a concept for the train of thought that is applied here. I think that we have to realize that the main source of revenue that we have is property tax. And the amount of property that we have that we can use to increase taxes if we have increased liabilities is somewhat limited. So we have to use care in planning what we put down on the pieces of property that we have so that we can adequately fund the future. Kurt and Angela made an excellent point when they were talking about the needs for roads, the needs for pipes. We have those built in to some degree yet, and I'm not sure how strong the demand yet is. But years ago, I was talking to Barry Sedlock, and we have a lot of pipe that was put in place back right after World War II or prior. And the stuff is approaching 100 years old, and you can fix it and patch up pieces. But it's not as good as having one whole new piece of pipe. You've got long-term maintenance problems with all these little fixtures. What I'm saying is that we need to get a grip to some degree. We have a lot of overlapping points here, is what I'm taking a long time to say. But we need to find a way to know what those needs are. I mean, like what I'm getting at, the quickest thing I can have is real in our mind right now is our police department. I mean, you can take a look. We've had a lot of turnover with police chiefs. They're all going into the pension. We've put a load into the pension. We still have to hire another guy. You see? Well, you need taxpayers for that. You still got this limited amount of taxable space. So I wanted to share that as something that would be in our thoughts as we're working on this through the future. I mean, these other points have been very well made. The cost per square foot is higher than I ever thought they would be at this time. That was a new thing, Kurt. I understand what you're saying about that. But I wanted to plant that seed early in because this is something that is going to ultimately be part of the future. You don't want to build something today that isn't big enough in terms of tax power 20 years from now or 15 years from now, and you have to tear it down and build something else. You have to try and put that into your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heil. Appreciate your
Sit here and listen
thoughts.
some more.
Please, stay with us. Okay. Just a couple of thoughts. Maybe we can kind of wrap up this section, possibly. You're looking for general guidance. I would say, if you look at the pieces of property that are available out there for potentially, say, for example, creative housing, whether it's multifamily or whether it's single family with clusters and that sort of thing, look at it from the standpoint of the Hawthorne example. The Hawthorne example is big enough that it actually becomes an environment in and of itself. Okay, it does not influence anybody around it. Okay, are there pieces of property that are selectively around that might fit that category? And that could become potential to look for. The other thing to look for, there are properties that are around, for example, existing multifamily. The Hawthorne example. There's Commerce Park is right next door. We've got the school. We've already talked about that. And there was a 5 or 6 or maybe it's even a 10-acre parcel that butted up against Loma Circle, for which there was a major controversy when it was clear cut. 5 or 6 or 10 years ago, I don't even remember.
Yeah, telling
But
us that.
things where the land is adjacent to an existing use, and where you can, by proper planning, create an environment which does not influence or negatively impact the single family around it. Maybe try to use that as a baseline, and then see what you can come up with creative housing that would fit that would meet that criteria. We don't want to negatively impact the neighbors. Okay, it's got to be a positive experience for everybody.
Right.
And so balancing those criteria might help you. But, I can't sit here and say, this parcel and this lot, but, if you look at your maps and make some judgments, you
we
can
do.
do that.
We have a development kind of potential map that we can superimpose stuff onto. There aren't a lot of big pieces left, though.
Well,
That's the challenge.
for whatever they might be.
Is that like incremental?
Yeah, if you find something that you can realistically make it fit,
Right.
okay, and meet the criteria of not messing up the adjacent neighborhoods, then that would be a great place to start. And then it could potentially be, eventually zoned consistent with whatever it is that plan that you lay out, could work. It's possibilities at this point.
Right. Right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I know this might be controversial, but just to play off of what you're saying about larger parcels where it might not affect surrounding people. I know we have open space like to the south of Macomb Street, where again I believe that's township owned. It would be a logical extension of the downtown area, and it doesn't really affect the residents in that area. If they were able to do a swap with like other open space out there or something like that, but just I don't think it shouldn't be like off the table as far as if there's a way that we can get more value, like for again looking at all those needs, that make sure that we're looking at all the options available, including some of that like the open space.
I'll say something on this. I mean, I hear you, Brian. I don't think we should look at touching open space just because of all the things that would open. It's just the way that was set aside. I think that's special. There's enough places that have open space like type conservation easements that we could look at without having to touch open space. I have some examples that I don't necessarily want to name right now, but I wouldn't go after open space personally.
Okay, well, we appreciate that. One more thought about this, building up on what Mr. Rather over here was saying. If we zone a piece of property for a particular size lot, okay, we do not have the authority, as far as I know, to be able to dictate what that builder puts on there beyond what is generally, for example, what is generally in the zoning ordinance. Obviously, there are limits there, but as John was saying, you can't, on that 16,000 foot parcel, he could put a 2,000 square foot house, or he could put a 5,000 square foot house, so long as he met setbacks and didn't have a Bigfoot house or other restrictions. Is that correct?
You can limit the size of dwelling units. Right now, the trend is to not do that for that reason, because let people have flexibility. But where we are talking about having maximum building footprint sizes is to preserve the character. So to Commissioner Angela's comment earlier of not having mega houses on postage stamp lots. So instead of having a minimum building size, you can have a maximum building size. You can limit the scale and the floor area, massing, character. You can regulate a lot. You already have a lot of that in there, but they're going to do whatever they can do to maximize the potential of lots usually.
For us, we have lot coverage ratio and floor area, okay, that we compare against the neighbors. So, if you're in a big house in a big neighborhood, that's okay. If you're a big house in a small neighborhood, that's not all right. And we have those regulations. But can you actually just set a ceiling? If you're going to build on this property, you're going to build 2,000 square feet, period.
No, you can't force anyone to build 2,000, but you can have a minimum or a maximum. Absolutely. You can say no bigger than this.
So you can say you will not build more than 2,000 square feet. He may decide, the person may decide to build it or not build it, but
right. You can limit the footprint size. You can limit the floor area ratio, which takes into account multiple stories, like multiple footprints, and there's a lot of math, clever math that you can do in all of that. You can't force anyone to build a 1,300.
No, not forcing them to.
Right, but you can limit. You can limit maximums and minimums to your heart's content.
Okay, so, the idea that if you have a small lot, you create a small lot.
Yeah.
You then have the potential to say, with this small lot, the house size will be no bigger than X.
Yep, absolutely.
As far as house size, one thing, there was talk of tax revenue. One thing is having larger homes, you pay more taxes. It doesn't increase the amount of, doesn't necessarily increase the amount of people going across the bridge, doesn't increase sewer usage, doesn't increase the amount of kids going to the schools. It doesn't use township resources by having a bigger house, but does create more taxes. The one thing that you might argue is it the character that we want, but having larger homes isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's probably the opinion of people. Maybe they don't like that character, but it is the one thing that doesn't use more township resources.
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
but
just
Dan,
look-
the thought is that you look at needs, right? So if you look at needs of people that have big homes that want now smaller homes, right? You're going to have more of an opportunity to sell smaller homes and bigger homes. And there is a need for certainly baby boomers that have big homes that they don't want anymore. Everybody's talking about downsizing. So yeah, you're right in what you say, but how many more, say 2,000, 2,200 square foot living opportunities are you going to sell compared to, the bigger homes? And right now on Groseal, if you say you raised a family of 3 or 4 kids and you have a 4 or 5 bedroom home, and now it's just you and your spouse, you don't want that house anymore, you want to move. Well, for the most part, you're either going to try to find a condo, and you're forced to do that, or you're going to have to move off the island because there isn't any smaller homes that allow somebody that had that living situation before to downsize but not downgrade.
Realtors are going to be calling you tomorrow, John.
But and aren't we talking about, though, we have a lot of, call it 18,000 to 2,200 square foot houses on the island that were built in the 50s and 60s to a large extent. And so the issue isn't so much we don't have houses in that 2,000 square foot range. It's that we don't have, modern conveniences, all, new kitchens, that sort of thing. I mean, I worry about the fact that we're creating a bunch of housing through this discussion, right? We haven't created anything. But we're talking about creating a bunch of housing that is replicating the housing that was built 70 years ago. When, I don't know, is there a way to talk about rehabbing the houses that we do
Absolutely.
have? So that the people that want to move here see that as
Right.
desirable housing. But they're already expensive. So
Right, that's what I
fix
was
them
saying.
up, and now they're more expensive.
You can
So-
incentive anything you want to incentivize or help subsidize housing investments, but that costs money and they're already expensive, and so it's at the mercy of the owner, really, right?
Are we ready to go to Macomb Street?
Yeah, I would like to wrap up this bit. So what the downtown vision or Macomb Street vision plan said, with the Downtown Development Authority, we've analyzed this plan. We think there's some merit to how do we incorporate some of this and translate some of this into some recommendations in the master plan. And I think the limitations of right-of-way and lot depth and all of that, it changes pretty significantly as you go up and down Macomb Street, and our walking tour proved that. And so I think how they have kind of segmented this into 4 different kind of sections. I'm not going to call them zones because we're going to get confused with zoning if we call them zones. So these 4 different sections kind of make sense, and there could be benefit to allowing for these different variations across Macomb Street. Now, there's a lot of mechanisms of how you can do that in zoning, but just at the very basic, I was hinting at it earlier with allowing more residential housing types than just a townhouse. You could have different segments of your Macomb Street district broken down, because really that stuff on the far western quadrant is much more auto-oriented than the rest of it, and so letting people have more flexibility with where parking can go or how far set back. The setbacks don't work the same way across all of this. So we can translate some of these recommendations into the Macomb Street future land use category as well, to just kind of modernize. I mean, it was fun for me to look at the current district knowing my colleagues wrote it, 15, 20 years ago, because they're the ones that taught me how to do all of this, right? So, I mean, outside school, but there are ways that we can tweak that and modify that to accomplish some of these goals, and to think about these different areas that they are different needs as you span the corridor. And you have some of that is related to some of the residential zoning that kind of, tucks its way, the R3 throughout. But I think you could permit some of that variation in housing type within your Macomb Street district itself too, in addition to the areas that are already zoned for R3 and stuff. So
Would the intent be still to maintain the basic character
yeah,
without compromising that?
yeah, I think the vision that, as I read it, is a walkable, Main Street kind of district, right? Like that has a mixture of uses, and all of that still is there. This is just adding a little bit more specificity. And so to me, the acknowledgement as we were walking that, it's going to be hard to get mixed use or commercial only in this stretch specifically, right? This has a more residential character anyway, so let's embrace that. Be flexible with the uses, be a little bit more flexible with the residential standards to allow things to happen there. That's the biggest, my bullet points here for that section too, like in just looking at your Macomb Street district now, like to make it more flexible is to let there be, a more variation in unit size. We tend to just not regulate number of bedroom of units. We just let the builders figure that out for what there's a demand for, let them, requiring a minimum of 2-bedroom units. If someone wants a 1-bedroom unit, where are they going to go? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get a nice housing stock along there. So I think just loosening up some of the standards may help more of this happen in that segment, especially. And to your point of density and things, I think one of the biggest, let me see, do I talk about it? Yes. Biggest limitations is limiting things to 2 stories. So construction, and now and in the foreseeable future and in the recent past, is nobody's building 2-story really anything other than single family homes, because there's just not the cost benefit to it. So in order to, you're going to get either a single story or probably 4 to 5 stories is where the math works. I don't make this up. This is what all of our developers and architects and friends tell us. So by limiting it to only 2 stories, you already allow, is it 35 feet? Oh no, that's the multifamily. We're not going to get to multifamily tonight, but I think that is, there are ways to build 3, 4 stories that still looks like 2 stories from the street, but has that extra, you're going to need that density for anything non-single story to get built in the district. That's just a rule of thumb that is the facts these days. So I also, in addition to that, think that the building coverage of 30% is really limiting for what reads to me like a Main Street district. We often don't limit building coverage at all in Main Street districts, and that may not make sense for the entire Macomb Street district, but definitely parts of it where it feels more walkable, downtown-y, for lack of a better, evoking a different, the character of it. And so, and again, then I would, you have some flexibility in the setback already, but requiring a minimum of 25, I think it's 25, is just, it's a lot doesn't help your walkability at all. The most we ever really do in a walkable district is 15, and that still gives you nice opportunities for kind of pseudo public space out front, but it's still the buildings are fronting the street. The other suggestion I would have in that district is to limit parking in the front of buildings, especially for the areas that aren't the westernmost part. We have a lot of different ways we do that. We have parking setbacks. We have a maximum number of percentage of your front facade that can have side yard parking. There's a lot of things that could be added into this to make it easier for development to happen, if that is what you want. And I think that's kind of the sense we got when we were out there. But a typical, 3-story building here, just using some kind of rough downtown building kind of heights you can see, is that 36 to 40 is usually the typical, and I'll defer to my architectural friends as well.
Hey,
But
John, just through the chair, if I can just ask a question.
Absolutely, please.
When you walk up and down Macomb Street, and this is the thing that we've struggled with the entire time as well, is that we have residential mixed with commercial. We have now more residential homes being built on Macomb in recent years. I mean, we've had 3 or 4 in the last 3 years, which is more than our commercial development.
Right.
If you take a look at building blocks, Mark Stanko put in an incredible building across the street. It's 2-story, and there's smaller houses on both sides. So all of a sudden, we also have to figure out how this contends with the Bigfoot housing as well, right? So I like the idea, if you can hide density and go to 3 stories and hide that density and get more density, that's a great idea. But we also have to make sure that we continue that character, even though it's a unique character of Macomb. And if I put a new house right next door, I would hate to see the 2nd story higher than my roof and the 3rd story being way above my roof.
yeah, so residential character limiting how big.
Well, I'm just saying that the 3-story, I understand if we can hide it to make it look like it fits in the character, that makes good sense for density. But now we have people building or buying lots and putting residential homes on Macomb. We want to make sure that we don't have a Bigfoot situation on Macomb Street either.
And when
right.
you say Bigfoot, are you saying Bigfoot residential? Or are you saying
Actually,
Mixed
commercial.
use?
Commercial.
So that's what we're saying, is there are ways that you can have step backs and setbacks that when you're
Right.
adjacent to residential. But
Right.
but that leads to another point, is should there be new single-family residential being built on Macomb? That was one thing that came up in our conversation on the street when we did our tours last year that I don't know that we really came to any sort of consensus on.
Well, and what I'm suggesting to you is that it was a dying trend. It's actually an increasing
I know, so
trend.
that's-
Why? Because people want to build smaller homes that are 1,500, 1,800 square foot. They want to be on Macomb so they can walk to the bakery, walk to the hardware store. So I don't think you want to limit it. It's been around for all these years. Actually, we saw residential almost disappear, and now it's like there's a rebirth on Macomb Street. And I think people like that idea that they can walk across the hardware in the morning, get their paper, and get their donut. Right? So again, I just wanted to, when we talk about this, we want to make sure that 3-story looks big, but in the realm of Macomb, probably it's not. We just want to make sure that if people have single-family homes, that we don't destroy their character either. More a comment than a.
I don't know if the term has died out, but I just think of form-based code where
That's
you
exactly, it already is, yes. Mhm.
I think one thing is it's a lot lower cost to build residential home on Macomb Street than it is to build a commercial building. So I think unless we make a change, I foresee more homes going on Macomb Street because that's the lower cost thing to build. But if we go back to what we want is this walkable downtown, one would be limiting, one thing that would help is limit residential, but also another important factor, and Kathleen touched on a little bit, one thing that hasn't been talked about is landscaping. Right now, we're required to have like 20 foot of landscaping between every development. That does not create a walkable downtown. Also, in most communities, the limiting of what, we talk about having a 4-story building, it'll never happen because you require too much parking. Parking
You'd have to reduce
parking in most any community is what limits the size of building that you put up. It's parking. So parking and landscaping we need to adjust those to create the walkable downtown that we have. And in my opinion, I really feel having these houses mixed in isn't helping our walkable downtown. And there's plenty of places to build houses on Groseal. I don't think we need to have it on Macomb Street.
I can interject it as just a bridge between both viewpoints. I don't think anyone is saying that we want to not have any residential on Macomb Street. I just think that we want to have residential because people do want those smaller buildings or homes, and they want to be able to walk to go get coffee, go get a donut. But we want to have more people be able to do that. If we do just single family residential, we're going to get, let's say, 10 people doing that within a day. But if we're able to do more multifamily residential and build up density, well, we might have 50 people doing that a day. So I think we're trying to be able to have that shared experience for more people rather than just a select few.
Yeah, I like, and I agree with you, Dan, for sure. I mean, that's the limiting is parking, and our landscaping is something that could be changed pretty easy, but I don't like the fact of completely eliminating residential on Macomb Street, right? But Dan brought up a good point. It's a lot easier to, or cheaper, or less expensive to build a home than it is to, okay, well, I'm gonna put a new commercial building, and, you know, quite honestly, there's commercial buildings that people can go and buy and develop, right, before new. So you gotta be careful that you don't have all residential on Macomb Street, and our downtown business district is now a residential street, right? And it's a tough situation that we're in as far as how we change zoning, and I don't quite honestly have an answer for that. It's very difficult. Everyone's bringing up great points, and they all make a lot of sense. So
We can increase the density of the housing, and they're kind of building off of what Brian was saying, you know, get away from those small residential homes and larger multifamily homes. And, you know, I feel that would be more fitting with our downtown district, you know, but, we're still, it's still important. We have to have commercial down there. You're not creating a downtown. It's still an important factor.
I think the zoning or the Macomb Street is, I think it should be more focused on developing the commercial side of it, right, than the residential side, to make it easier for people to develop commercial opportunities for the residents.
I mean, I think you need both, because you want the commercial, you want it to be successful and thriving, but if we don't have like denser residential within walking distance, everybody has to get in their cars, and then you have to use have those parking lots, and so it's like it's a chicken or egg thing, and you're trying to find that sweet spot where you get enough density of residential and commercial, like for that synergy between the two.
I guess I'd ask a question. Our current zoning that we have on Macomb Street, do we see that as a problem right now?
I think it could be tweaked. I think there are things that are challenging to the point of landscaping, parking. I'm saying building height. I'm saying townhouses are the only residential style. You can, there are a lot of ways to make it more flexible. I don't think it's impossible, but you can definitely tweak a lot of it.
I can't help but notice, though, that if you look at the number of vacant lots, even within what you're
It's
calling
old,
Zone 2,
but yes.
I mean,
Right.
there aren't big parcels there.
No.
So it's not like you could build a development that would have, 10 duplexes or, I mean, I just wonder, it's all a nice theory, but unless somebody's tearing down occupied properties, there's not much more than maybe a few townhomes that somebody could build.
Right.
Well, and that's why, I don't know if you have that slide where you go to the different uses that you'd permit, right? You'd allow, instead of those single-family homes, you'd allow some to be maybe duplexes or have an accessory dwelling unit instead of just the townhomes, which would increase the density, and allow residential there. I did have a question. I think I heard you say in the beginning, it's cost prohibitive to do more than, or you need 4 floors before it makes sense, or 4 stories. Is 3 stories still worth it, or what do you?
Not usually.
Not usually. So even if we allowed 3 stories, it probably wouldn't get built from what you've seen, right? Gotcha. Yep.
But it would be for residential.
Yes.
You're talking only commercial.
Mixed,
Okay.
mixed
Yeah.
use or commercial, but
we-
it's the product itself, like the actual construction methods, that dictate the cost as much as anything. And so if you're doing 3-story townhouses is one thing, because they're usually more like 2.5, but like 3 stories of residential flats is still going to be more expensive than regardless of whether there's commercial adds even more cost to it. But like a little like mini apartment building is still going to be expensive to build.
What sort of commercial? You're talking about 4-story commercial building on?
So it would be
Macomb Street?
first floor only and then residential above. So usually
I see.
it's almost always like, but I will say, everywhere we've been trying to write this kind of form-based code zoning for downtowns in the last 20 years, it is really hard to get those projects financed and to get retail units on those first floors. It is really challenging. Just how our banks are set up and stuff like that too. So you're really much more likely here going to get side-by-side mixed use. The chances of you getting much stacked that's mixed use is low. So that's why allowing a multi-story apartment building, like stacked flats kind of a thing, is much more likely. It's easier for them to get the financing for that to happen.
In this small community, I think doing anything much more than 2 stories will be very difficult, because then because people don't like walking up to a 3rd story.
Right.
And I don't see these developments being able to include elevators. You know, you start getting elevators. Elevators
That's
is a
the
very
cost.
large cost. You know, so it's any commercial building that's 2 stories has to have an elevator in it. Residential is the one type that you can go 2 stories. You can go 3 stories. It's hard to get people to occupy the 3rd story or even a 4th story.
Right. Walk
You know,
up.
with no elevator.
Can you do that with ADA compliance?
Residential.
Yeah, because the
Residential.
first floor units can be ADA.
What about the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th?
Well,
They don't have to
they
be
don't.
ADA compliant?
Only a percentage needs to be accessible
Oh,
For residential.
for residential.
For
Now,
residential.
commercial, everything has to be accessible. So if you have a 2-story commercial building, you have to, unless it's a very small upper level, it has to have an elevator.
Right, which is why that cost, elevators just jack
well,
everything up.
earlier on, we were saying in our discussion when we were talking about more density, there seemed to be a general consensus that around Macomb was
Right.
a logical fit for this. So as I look at Macomb Street right now, I think I don't know currently, but there are a fair amount of empty buildings. I mean, businesses that were there that aren't there anymore. And I know we, as a planning commission, have seen in the past office space actually come back in as residential, where we approved a change to an existing building. So the probability of somebody coming in, if you're going to put in a business and stuff over it, you've got to have a business first.
And that's why it's
And
not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
But what could happen is, it could be, just strictly residential, whether it's the multifamily or the options that you describe. And that wouldn't have to be 4 stories or 3 stories.
For them to make money back on it, though, like acquiring a parcel, putting in a building, they still need to be able to get their return, right? So, yeah, it can only be 2 stories, but I don't know that just a 2-story apartment building is going to pay the development costs that it's going
Correct.
to cost them to go through the review process, to have whatever utility hookup stuff, to the cost of construct, that's why it's this trade-off. People don't want to walk any higher than 3 stories, but 2 stories, you're just not seeing much get built beyond single-family duplexy kind of things at 2 stories,
Right, and-
which is fine. And you could get more of that density along here with the example on the top here, a duplex, triplex kind of a thing that's built like a residential single-family house but has more units in it.
But, yeah, I think we have to provide the option, right? I mean, the option has to be there. The DDA wants tax capture,
Right.
And so even though some folks might say, hey, we don't want too much residential, to have 2 or 3 new homes that go up on, they don't mind, but it's really a commercial-driven DDA,
Right.
So they need to have the option so a developer does it, but the
Right.
cost to build right now developers are looking at what their return is, and the return's not that great when you only have a lot that's a 40-foot wide lot and you can only put up 1 duplex. That's just hard.
The math doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. They want your reference in the middle. They want 4 units
Yep.
like that. That's what they want.
And that's why I said before, searching for property maybe off of Macomb Street,
Right.
but is it adjacent and walkable? That's where if we have any property where we can get that higher density, that would be good. I was just gonna say the other thing just to mention is you know, again, this is just me speculating or anything, but you know, the post offices and such, like they seem to be, you know, decreasing in popularity. Like that could be something that
Yeah.
redevelops in the future. We have the Vitality site. There's a couple of other large sites, especially like on the western end.
Yeah.
And so that's where you might have some opportunity for some of that, you know, larger parcel development.
Right.
I'll just add one more thing. I know we've had the perspective of outside developers coming in trying to get a return. What I think is going to likely happen if we permit more uses, what the most of the development's going to be people themselves living in those houses, maybe adding on or doing something. That's where you're going to get most folks. So the more we permit uses of or allow things like a duplex, I think the more likely we will get those things from, again, not from outside developers coming in, but from people that own a home there or want to add on to it or do something like that. That's where I think you're going to get the folks adding on to things.
I just wanted to say that keep, like we've opened up to do townhouses on Macomb Street, but one thing I wanted everyone to keep in mind is for a single family home, all you need is one homeowner's wish to put a home there on Macomb Street, and they'll hire a builder, architect, and a builder to build it. To build anything more than a single family, you start doing duplex or quadplex or multi-level building, you need a developer. So it's really two different things. It's much more difficult to develop because you need a developer who's interested in doing it. So I think we're always going to see more single family homes on Macomb Street. I'm not sure how long our ordinance has been in place, but I would think it would be natural you're going to see more single family homes there because they're easier and lower cost to develop.
Been there forever. Yeah, good point. Okay, well, we're now about 10 minutes to 10, and 10 o'clock is our cutoff.
I just wanted to give you kind of an update, more to come on Commerce Park.
Okay.
We met with the,
I'm sorry.
we're not going to let John say anything.
Why we brought this up now.
I'm just
I
saying,
said 9:58.
we're talking about it. I think not a lot changing, but again, allowing more flexibility, looking to write in some more of the things we've been talking about. It doesn't explicitly say housing right now, and we think that's a missed opportunity. stay tuned. We'll have something to show on that later. The other,
I do want to say one thing.
You have a 2-minute
Well, because it was brought up with the
Sure.
with the Meridian School.
Meridian, that's why I brought it up earlier, yeah.
Yeah. So there was an agreement, or at least an understanding that whatever this commission decides on taking that property, right? Because I'm glad somebody brought it up. I don't know who it was. That the northern part of the airport property could be easily incorporated into that overall project, right? Which would make it potentially more economical for a developer to provide the benefits of the residents of the type of housing that we want. So I just wanted to throw that out, that hard border is a dotted line at this point.
Still trying to get another follow-up conversation with the school district too.
Are you going to be able to get around the property ownership question?
Working on it.
Yeah.
You think so? Okay, good. That would help.
Build in the flexibilities that hopefully they can. Yeah.
Let's just say that it's always been easy to say no, right? But with the changes and things that, that we were talking about in this overall plan, that we had to have that conversation with let's go, let's not start out with no, I guess. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
One final thing to talk about is my recommendation to remove this public and semi-public classification from future land use. And this is best practice to have a plan for when things are not always going to be public or semi-public. Churches, schools, township-owned facilities. It limits you for what it can be rezoned to in the future if you leave it this way on a future land use map. Now, it doesn't mean that those things are going to disappear the minute we change the future land use. It just limits how zoning in the future can happen. So I always recommend to remove this. The good thing is, most of them are already zoned a residential use anyway. So usually our advice is to say to bring it in, to future land use plan it, a similar category to what it's nearby, because that generally makes the most sense. So it's also helping to bring your future land use into better alignment with zoning, which we don't usually go that way, but in this case, I recommend that. And so I offer these potential future land use changes. On these blue parcels are all the public, semi-public, and what I think they probably make sense to be. For instance, we talked about Meridian School, right? Right now, that's future land use planned for public, semi-public. So if someone, let's say we add a PUD back into the ordinance, you have some sort of flexible housing development that could happen there. Right now, it doesn't align with your future land use map, would require it to be public, right? So in that case, I would say definitely make it the same color orange that's right next to it, right? Or these other little pockets through here, making them all just whatever their adjacent residential is generally the rule of thumb, because you never know.
Will that create any variances or issues for these people? No?
Aren't like the school, isn't that already zoned residential? I mean, because
It is, but-
churches, schools are allowed to go to residential. So I would assume if you got rid of that function, it should be residential.
Right, it should be. But if they wanted to come in, if you create a new, if right now, if they came in and wanted to rezone to something, that is different than what they are, or upzone, let's say, like if I don't remember, right, I have to look at zoning to see what the school is zoned. I think, I'm not sure it's zoned for multifamily right now. I think it might be zoned for single family. So like, that's the kind of stuff that like, by making it more logical of what it's next to and what we want it to be, gives you that flexibility that if we come up with a new zoning tool in a few years that helps get at this mixture of housing types, you're able to let them rezone to one of these new things that we're thinking about. So it doesn't materially change much, to be honest. It's just it's a cleanup kind of thing to make things better for if things are ever to stop being that.
But they would simply be notified of a zoning change? And
This
that
is
would,
future land use.
okay, so,
No, it's just changing our future land use map. Like, just like we might add the different
okay, now I
residential
I
character
understand.
types to it, or we might,
okay.
yeah, it's really not, it doesn't really impact a ton.
Can I ask one more question? We used to have, I believe it was an M1 district, which was mobile home that we were required by law to have on our island somewhere.
You have a M1 is an old industrial district. You do have
Or M2,
mobile home park zoning district. You just don't have it placed anywhere, and that's fine. You can do that. So by by case law, there was a bunch. Again, this was before I was a planner. So more than 20 years ago, there was a big mobile home lobby that like changed how things work in Michigan, where you have to allow it somewhere. But if it doesn't make sense, which it doesn't in your township, so whoever advised you at the time to create a mobile home district and just not have it platted on the map, that's fine. You can do that. We often just include it as a use, and we don't have to even talk about it, frankly, in
Okay.
planning.
I just was,
Mm-hmm.
just didn't know. Okay.
That, and then we've talked about Hennepin Point a bit with BASF and trying to understand. They're kind of getting to the end of their like remediation process. And so because it's been 20 years since the plan was written, this special environmental, I think combining special environmental into this kind of outer islands classification of just, long-term, nothing should happen there. It should be, very passive, if any, recreation, but mostly conservation and restoration and that kind of stuff. I think that would be one way to clean up and just combine things in your future land use. You could change it in zoning, but you don't need to. It's just, you could phase it out in the future. There's not a lot that differentiates these in terms of what's happening on these environmentally sensitive kind of areas. So that was just my other suggestion.
I agree
Makes
with that.
sense.
Cool.
Okay, well, we're about at 10 o'clock.
That's-
Are we at the end of the?
Yep, that's what I
Write
needed.
the plan, okay. Very good. Well, let's do a little critique here. Kathleen, what's your thoughts on what you've heard tonight?
I am going to try and find what data we can to talk about some of the trade-offs so that as we kind of propose some changes to anything, what the trade-offs are, and come back with some kind of this or that kind of scenarios. I think we can do some of that at our steering committee meeting next week. Talk about what, if any, changes to the residential districts there should be. We're going to take our redevelopment opportunity map and kind of overlay it now with this like future land use like analysis to try to find those intersection points of where there could be some of these focusing on intensifying density in places that make sense and not materially changing more of the same, which is already much of how the township is built out in those other single-family districts. We'll figure out some level of accessory dwelling unit, what that might look like, and run some numbers and evaluate that. But I didn't hear a lot of other big changes. I will go through all my notes again as well. But does that sound like a plan?
It does. You'll be coming back to us, what do you think, in a month or 6 weeks, or what? How
don't wanna
does this
promise.
fit with your schedule?
Yeah, we have a tight schedule this summer. Yeah, we're hopefully, yep, I'm soon. Well, we have some dates penciled in on the calendar. I just don't know them, and my brain is fried. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so you'll come back with this information to us, and we'll go through this
Draft.
process again, this time with a little more data, and
Yep,
hopefully then at that
and-
point be able to,
We'll be able to react to something more concrete.
excellent. Okay, well, I'd like to get a critique from the table. We just spent 3 hours. Kyle, what's your thoughts on this?
I think we're starting to get into the meat and potatoes, and I like that. So I'll leave it there for now.
Dan?
I think we had some great conversations. I'm definitely interested in seeing a little more on, metrics or what can influence our decision for these different items. But I think a great discussion has been started, and I'm looking forward to what happens at our next meeting.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah, I think this is all really good and really interesting. You can tell we're not going to make this easy on you. We have a lot of opinions, and but hopefully you hear that there is a willingness to listen and think about it, but we're going to challenge throughout. So, like one of the things that comes to mind, and Kyle brought it up earlier. I think it was you, Kyle, that brought it up earlier. That the R1E overlay and all the other things were designed to limit us to no more than 12,000 people, and we're still not much north of 10. Did R1E do that? Did natural selection of other macroeconomic and microeconomic
Recession
factors
10 years
kept
ago?
us to 10,500 or wherever we are? Because I think if we, the fear then that it was going to go to 14,000 or something like that, it doesn't seem like lifting R1E would do that, but there was some math that was telling us that was going to be the case then. So do we kind of reorient our thinking to say, look, you could unwind all those things you did 25 years ago, and you're still not going to get to 12,000 people, or no, these are the critical pieces. Because, like, I was looking at your chart. I'm sorry, I'm making this longer than
That's fine,
you
go ahead.
wanted. But when you had the chart, and admittedly, I understand the caveats that it's a lot of guesswork going. But when you had the potentially splittable lots and things like that, as you look at them, you'd say, like, a lot of them are along the canal, right? That are more than 16,000. Presumably, what you're saying is that's big enough that somebody could split that lot in two, put two houses on that property. It's not likely to happen.
Right.
B, we wouldn't want it to happen. So you can kind of eliminate a lot of those.
Right.
So what's left, when we get to the ones that would be something we would want to consider, and it's plausible, because that's really the sweet spot, right? We're willing to take townhouses, but apparently nobody wants to build townhouses.
Right.
So that's not the sweet spot. So what is the sweet spot where we
Yeah.
allow things that people actually want to do in the marketplace, today or within the next 10 years. So that's really the, kind of the vision as I look at this is where are we going to move the needle on this? Because we could do lots of things, and if we lift R1E and all it does is it enables 4 people to build houses that couldn't do it before, have we really done anything? So that's really and they may not be the 4 that we want done, right? So that's really I'm going to be looking for things like that, more data and more analysis of scenario planning.
Thank you, Jay. Sir, Brian.
I think it was 3 hours well spent over here. I know that some people have said their brains are fried. I'm just getting going over here. It was exciting.
Write all those comments down and just
But
email them to me.
I would just say, in general, I like the way the conversation has been going. Interested, again, in metrics and finding that sweet spot and being able to do more new urbanism or walkable places and be able to build quality sense of place within our community.
I think one of the things that we learned is that there's not one solution, right? Lifting or modifying R1E isn't going to specifically do what we may want to do, but that in combination with a couple other things could achieve that. So that just makes it more difficult to kind of pinpoint what we need. But I think it was a great meeting to talk about all the different opportunities. And now I think locations are going to be important.
Yep.
And that's what I'm looking for in the next step.
Thank you, John. Angela.
Ditto to a lot of what Jay said, but I also want to, just say thank you for pushing us to think differently and to have bigger conversations and really think outside the box in a different way. So I know that's not always easy. And much appreciated. I hope we gave you enough feedback and direction and information so that you feel comfortable with, what you need to come back with. Selfishly speaking, I'd love to see a lot more flexibility on Macomb. I think there's, hindrances there. So I'd love to see more, just in general, just more flexibility so that we can be more adaptable going forward.
Thank you, Angela.
Yeah, and flexibility might be the word. I'm not keen on absolutes. So,
Okay.
Let's get rid of this. That I've never done that with anything I do, just because I think that creates another event on the other side. So if it is flexible, if it is transitional, if it is adaptive, whatever it might be, I think that's the way we have to explore it. I mean, overlay district was put in, and those that remember this, 25 years ago, there were clear cuts going on in Grosse Ile of 60 acres, 100 acre property. So the idea was, instead of putting 40 homes on this development, how about put 20 and then put a little buffering so you can help your surrounding neighbors. There's not a lot of open space like that left, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we continue the character of Grosse Ile, right? That's what we've all fought for over these years. I don't think it's a hidden lie. I think someone said that it was a hidden lie. I don't think it's a lie. I think people like the character of Grosse Ile. People move here for a reason. I think if we just we're not that absolute, I think this process will probably become even more productive.
Thank you, Kurt. Well, 2 points. First, I think this was a very effective meeting at getting ideas and thoughts out on the table. Good dialogue back and forth, different opinions being expressed, and that is precisely what the planning process is supposed to be. Just from, again, my opinion, riding around on my bicycle through the communities and through the neighborhoods, we live in a beautiful, beautiful place, okay? And I am a person who is, I guess, an incrementalist. Rather than a gigantic change type person, I'm a person. Let's increment it in directions where we will enhance it without risking the beauty and the quality of life that we have on this island. And it's a balancing act for sure, but. I look around and I say, man, 95% of this island is just ideal. What a great place to live, okay? And let's tweak the last 5%. Let's move it in a direction that we think will make it even better 10 years from now. So those are my thoughts.
And John, let me just add one thing. When we talk about success, that's not said in my mind sarcastically. John's been here for 52 years at the planning commission, or you've been
Not
here
quite
for a
that
long
long.
time.
No, he's only been chair for 52. He's been here longer.
But you think about it, the planning, I mean, all the time and effort that you and all the other planning commissioners over the years have spent, they've put a lot of time and effort into it, right? They really have. I mean, no one takes this lightly, right? So even the discussion today for 3 hours, none of us take it lightly. So, obviously, John, you've been around the longest, but you think about all the time and effort you put in every subdivision and every development, there's a reason why. It's as beautiful as it is when you drive by it on your bike, right? Time and effort, right? So to me, it's a success. This island's unique for a lot of reasons. I'm glad that it's unique.
Very good. Okay, well, on that note then, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
May I-
Oh,
sorry, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Kyle, you
I
wanted
know
to
there's
speak?
a commission member reports thing. I don't want to make everyone go, but I did want to talk about something if I can, just
Oh,
township
please,
board related.
absolutely.
So every time I sit down here, Mr. Boggs here says, "Hey, anything new on the toll bridge?" And usually the answer is no. But I did want to let you all know, because we got a lot of great minds up here on the panel. So the plan at this point is to get something before the voters in November. In order to do that, we need to get ballot language together by August 13th, which, as you all know, is less than a month away. There's only 2 township board meetings between now and then, July 22nd and August 12th. I don't think either of those are going to work, so there's very likely going to be a special meeting on this. I just really first want you all to watch for that and give any insight to me or any other board members, because it's a big decision how to do this. And I am bound. I did sign a non-disclosure agreement, mostly around the finances of the current toll bridge and just certain things like that. But I think I can disclose without going over that when we entered into this process, the idea was to be able to purchase the toll bridge with the tolls, kind of using the tolls to fund itself, basically. From the engineering reports that are just in draft form right now that we've gotten, it looks like we're not going to be able to do that. In order to purchase the bridge, not only will we have to use the tolls to fund it, but we'll likely have to go out to a millage in order to get the weight limits up to where trucks can go across it. That's right now it's at 7 tons, have to go up to 36 tons. So, I mean, I'll just tell you all, I'm pretty concerned about it. I know we're all here. We care very deeply about this island. But again, seeing that amount of money needs to be put into the toll bridge to get it up to where we need to go, it's concerning to me. I'm not going to use the numbers from the draft report, but I'll go off the Free Bridge from what we know there. Tens of millions needs to be put in it just to get it to the functional level. And we know replacement costs of the Free Bridge are between $100 million and $200 million. These are just huge numbers that are going to be hard to get even from state or federal sources. If we use those numbers on the toll bridge similarly, thinking about $100 million, $200 million replacement costs, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it, honestly. I'll tell you all, I'm concerned, and I'm trying to come up with any ideas I can to make it less cost prohibitive. The only one that I've been able to come up with so far is petitioning the Coast Guard to not make it fixed span anymore, so we don't have to worry about swinging at least one of those bridges anymore. If we're going to purchase the toll bridge, I'd like it to be the toll bridge, so we don't have to spend the money to get that going. But yeah, that's a tall order. That's a federal government ask, things like that. So anyway, that's what I'm concerned about. Want to put it out to you all. A lot of great minds here. And yeah, just watch closely this month. Of course, it'll go before the voters in November, so we'll all have a say. But it's some big decisions we got to make pretty soon, So sorry to drop that bomb on you all. at 10
That's
o'clock
great
tonight.
information. Thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of interest in that in the television audience as well. So thank you, Kyle. Okay. Any further thoughts? Hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.